You need to be careful because of the racial thing. You see that, right? There's going to be people in the department who see this that way. You see that, right?
I wasn't scared. I wasn't angry. I didn't give a shit he was black or whatever. Or maybe I did. How the fuck do you know if that's in your head or if it's not?
Alex Cottrell and Toby Huntingford present Caught on the Wire. This podcast is an episode-by-episode analysis of HBO's widely acclaimed TV series about the city of Baltimore, its people, and its many problems. Find more information about the show and all the episodes online at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com. Welcome back again after our short break. It's Season 3, Episode 9, Slapstick. Hopefully it hasn't been so long that we've completely forgotten how to do this. Toby, trust you had a good break?
Yeah, it was nice actually. Yeah, it's been a beautiful summer. The tennis has been on. Wimbledon's hit London again.
Yeah, Wimbledon, that's right.
So I always love that time of year, and I can just kind of zone out to the tennis all day. So been enjoying that. A shame about Murray. We're broadcasting just as Murray has been knocked out of the tournament. And we're also kind of last-minuting. We should have really uploaded this morning, shouldn't we? But we're hopefully going to squeeze in our upload just before the end of Friday.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. And our American friends who are a few hours behind should hopefully not notice that too much.
And also, I guess it's also part of the fact that, having moved house, I've only really just got settled in myself, so...
Yeah, definitely. How is it to record in the new studio? Does it change the vibe of the show for you, or is it...
Well, the new studio, I've done a slight upgrade in that I've just done a little bit more acoustic treatment in here than I had in the last place, so it's proper. It's really nice and dead in here. It's good.
No echo whatsoever.
Well, it doesn't really echo so much as like flutter in small rooms like this. But that and all the problems you have with low end. But anyway, it's you probably won't even really notice the difference in terms of this recording because I'm just sat here with one microphone anyway. But but it's nice to be all settled in the new place, and that's all sorted now. So back to the podcast.
Back to week by week crunching out, hopefully. Yeah. How's it been?
Well, I haven't been, because of the move, I haven't really been keeping up with TV or film or anything like that this week so much. I did rewatch the first series of The Thick of It last night, which is not saying much because there's only 3 episodes in classic British TV style. A series being 3 episodes.
That's not even a mini-series, is it? It's like a full series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's so good that it doesn't matter.
It is.
The Thick of It is amazing.
Yeah, it's so authentic, isn't it? And it's a very short show in terms of number of episodes, but the actual amount of content there is packed into each one is quite astonishing. Like it's
there's not a moment wasted, is there? It's one of those shows where nothing is really done without a damn good reason. Like,
exactly, and people talk so fast and so frenetically, and everyone's so stressed the whole time that it really does feel like it covers like 2 hours worth of content in the short half an hour that you spend with it. So you do have to be on your toes to kind of follow it along. But yeah, it's
a very eloquent show. Like, it's a lot of kind of very, very high quality writing.
Yeah, so subtle as well. It really feels like
to those of you that are uninitiated, that The Thick of It is a British comedy drama that focuses around a particular department within the British government and kind of all the stress and trouble and political manoeuvring and dealings with the media. And it's sort of both simultaneously incredibly authentic and feels like it could be real, but also like hilariously eccentric. And it's a genuinely very funny show if you like that style of humour. Like that mockumentary, very kind of dry, not played up at all. You're not getting a laugh track or anything like that. It is that mockumentary style, like with the original Office, for example.
Oh yeah, definitely. Was there a US make of this show? Possibly is. Yeah, there was a US remake, 2007.
Didn't they do Veep?
Veep is the closest.
Isn't that meant to be a bit
probably
like
the
it?
probably the closest American show there is to the thick of it? Yeah, and Veep I've heard is a very high quality show.
I've heard good things.
Yeah. And it's still going at the moment, but yeah, I guess it's kind of in the same vein, that kind of political drama / a bit of comedy in there as well, balancing the line very well.
There's no way the swearing can match up to Malcolm Tucker's, though. There's no way. Apparently, they have a writer on the show. I think his name is Ian Martin, and his job is to write all of the creative insults throughout the show.
Well, he certainly does a good job, because none of them get boring. Like, they're absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, it's a very wonderfully written show.
And it's the really thick Glaswegian accent that really makes, it's half the insult there, right there, really. They're absolutely fantastic.
It's the fact that all the enforcers in the British Parliament, they're all angry Scotsmen. Because there's Jamie as well.
Yeah.
As well as Malcolm Tucker.
That's true. God, yeah, I do need to fly back through those episodes. It's a really easy show to watch, actually, guys. You should definitely jump on it.
Yeah, the thick of it, highly recommended if you've not seen it.
Yeah. I'm afraid I have nothing to report on my end of watching. I did see the end of True Detective episode 1 eventually after about 4 attempts. I did actually watch it while I was relatively awake, and I think that made all the difference because I actually ended up enjoying it a fair amount by the end of the episode. Still yet to watch the second one, unfortunately. I think there might be 3 out now. But it feels like a dark detective show like the first time round, and I will be picking it up at some point. So otherwise I really haven't seen much at all. I've been zoning out with the tennis at the moment and just enjoying the sunshine. So I guess it's been a break on all fronts, really.
Yeah, Wimbledon is very much saturating the BBC at the moment, so...
I know a lot of non-sports fans get really pissed off around this time of year because all their programming is removed from the schedule. Like, there's nothing apart from the tennis. Both BBC channels are wall-to-wall tennis most of the day. So
yeah. Although, I mean, irrespective of whether or not you like these sporting events, you've got to say, like, BBC coverage of sporting events is always impeccable. It's just stunning.
Apart from the punditry and particularly the interviews are absolutely toe-curling.
Oh yeah, but that stuff's always shit.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the whole premise of that is pretty shit, isn't it? Like, it's very rare that you get sports analysis that's really like academically engaging. A lot of it is kind of, you don't need to have a particularly deep understanding of tennis in order to engage with any of the punditry, I feel.
I don't know, I mean, Sky Sports does a very good job for paying sports customers with the analysis that they hire people and they talk a bit more in depth.
I don't watch Sky,
But
so yeah.
It's certainly, I mean...
You tell me.
Yeah, it's just a different way of doing it, really. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the actual coverage and the actual arrangement they have down there on the courts, it really is amazing. You don't miss a trick.
Yeah, I was just thinking about kind of the fact that every single game is, properly, really nicely shot and everything's just laid out very cleanly and the website's really good and it's all together in one little package. I mean, they did the same thing with the Olympics. Like, you could just watch anything that was going on and it was all very nicely packaged together.
Yeah.
And it went together with all the website and online features and it was brilliant. I mean, again, like the punditry is very kind of, like, it's just kind of, it's there and it's not bad, it's not good, it's just kind of the bits in between the bits that you're actually interested in, as far as I'm concerned. That's how I feel about it anyway.
Yeah, definitely.
So
I do like the thing that's great about the tennis matches is they keep zooming in and out of all these sort of famous people and trainers, and you kind of see that everyone's emotional reaction to it, and it's such an emotional sport, tennis as well. And the way they just kind of blend that all with the actual game and interesting camera shots and slow-mos, it's absolutely fantastic. So it's a great 2 weeks of the year.
And it's different to say something like football or soccer to our American cousins, where it's a team of people. Whereas on tennis, there's so much pressure put on one person. I mean, obviously there are a lot of sports like that, but the way it is in tennis is just quite unique, really. And Wimbledon has a very certain atmosphere to it, and anybody who's been to Wimbledon will know that sense that you get of it when you watch it on TV, you definitely feel it when you're really there.
Oh yeah,
it's a really unique place.
It's a really well behaved crowd, but the crowd do get caught up in the emotion if it's a good game. Like they won't hold back, and it's a perfect mix of that. If you go to a soccer game or a football game, the whole match is just a big lull of kind of chanting, and there's just so many people there that you can't really work out the course of the match from the people. I don't know, but that's certainly my take on it. There's just a bit more of sort of dynamic crowd response at tennis, and it's just
it's very different when you're actually there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Was this because you went on Wednesday?
I was there on Wednesday. Yeah, I was on court seeing the big matches.
Was that the second or third time you've been?
I think it's the third or fourth. I haven't been in a few years. We enter the ballot every year. You have to enter the ballot quite a few months in advance because it's such an oversubscribed thing. And if you're lucky, you'll get assigned some tickets for one of the two big show courts, and then you got to cough up the cash and on you go. So this year we got lucky. Didn't quite get centre court, but got number one court, and got to see Wawrinka and Federer, Gasquet, Simon. So 2 Swiss, 2 French. But yeah, 2 very fantastic games.
I've only been once myself, and it was just a ground pass. So we went to court 3. I think that's the highest one you can go with just a ground pass.
No, you can go into court 2, I believe, as well. But I think the queue's often quite
2 as
long.
well?
Yeah.
Well, either way, we saw what I think was like the semi-finals of the ladies' doubles. So that was like as prestigious as it got for me. But I still really enjoyed it. You still pick up that atmosphere and kind of big crowds everywhere, and it was kind of actually nice to go to the smaller courts and see, like, we saw this one game and it was like the boys singles. It was like a semi-final or something, and there were these guys and they were like, I don't know, it was like 17 or 18 or however old it is you have to be in that category, and they were like, it was incredible to watch them. I thought they were really good.
Yeah.
And they weren't even the absolute top guys and girls. So
Absolutely. I mean, any game of tennis can be very, in and of itself can be very, very gripping, even if the rest of the world isn't taking notice, sort of thing. It's great just to wander around and see all the games going on.
It's quite deceptive as well. I mean, obviously, you can see a tennis court in real life fairly simply, but you kind of forget, having watched it on TV, like how big the court really is.
Yeah.
And what an art there is to, say, serving or moving around the court appropriately, because there's a big space you've got to cover. So.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
And the US Open will be coming in a couple of months as well, which is always great. It's always my sort of second favourite of the Grand Slams. So be enjoying that. But yeah, so there's our little tennis break that we've discussed. Sorry, that was quite an excursion. I don't know if Listener's Corner has been very active while we've been away.
Listener's Corner has been set on fire and is burning hot. It's just a alarming number of messages this week. So we might as well get started with them now because we've got a few to go through.
Yeah.
And some of them invoke certain topics of discussion I think that we could definitely benefit from going through. So I'm just going to take a look at what we've got here. Yes, so we had the first one we'll read out is from our regular contributor Dan, who is our Wire fan and fellow composer, fellow musician, and he's just following on from an email that he sent I think the week before, or 2 weeks before that, just saying that he was enjoying the episode. Said he enjoyed us when we were talking about Stringer and Avon, the kind of stuff that we covered there, which is good. I'm glad that we dedicated a bit of time to that because it is, as we said, a very important scene. One thing that he does raise here, he says, quote, "You guys mentioned that this episode signals the end of D'Angelo's arc," referring to moral midgetry, last week's episode. "But I would disagree. I think D'Angelo's shadow still hangs over the rest of the season in the form of Brianna's interactions with Avon. Firstly, she confronts Avon, I think in the next episode, about D'Angelo's death. Avon lets slip with something about, 'I had nothing to do with it,' which I'm sure you guys will talk about further. Finally, the final episode sees Brianna abandoning Avon in court. I always saw this as the true end of D'Angelo's arc, in conjunction with the final breakup of the Barksdale family."
Yeah, and
Because I believe we had a conversation about how sort of his arc came to an end.
yeah,
We felt at that last in that last episode with Stringer and Avon's final scene.
and as if on cue, having watched this week's episode, Dan's absolutely right that there was, another pretty important scene really. That carries on this argument and carries on this friction. I'm sure we'll discuss it a little bit later, but yeah, absolutely. And I'd also forgotten about the final court scene where she abandons him. And having reflected on that, it does seem like a much more fitting end for the whole D'Angelo arc, and kind of what that actually means in terms of the Barksdale relationship. So yeah, good observations, Dan, and bad memory on our parts, I guess.
Well, I was thinking as well that, and I said this in the email response that I sent to him, that maybe it's sort of unwise to assume, especially with this show, that any of the arcs really end at all, because the whole nature of the show is that it's showing that everything is quite cyclic and everything follows on from one another. There is no event without having some kind of consequence, no matter how small. So the idea of an arc coming to an end is very much a product of a more, for lack of a better term, like traditional TV storytelling method. Whereas the actions that D take, they don't really come to an end per se, because the consequences continue throughout the whole show.
Yeah.
You know, everything is kind of tied together in that way, so it's quite difficult to say where arcs begin and end, because you can't segregate all of the effects of it quite so easily.
Yeah, I feel like The Wire does certainly do that, and it does that most notably through carrying on the arcs through other characters. There's kind of replacement characters, particularly in the final montage.
Absolutely,
and there is. I mean, D is one of the characters I can't really think of a replacement. There's no one that really steps up to the D role.
He's just so unique, man.
Yeah. Oh, it's just a reflection of how fierce the game gets. There's not even room for D'Angelo to question things anymore.
Yeah.
So I think in some senses you could argue that D really doesn't have a replacement for his arc. But yeah, it's certainly a valid point about the ideas are cyclical no matter where you go.
Dan also wishes me a very nice message about getting the move all sorted, because he says that as a fellow composer, he knows how much of a headache it can be to move a load of gear. So, and it can be. I think I've got pretty good at sorting everything up now. I've done it a few times now. So
I don't think you can beat our move. Do you remember the 40 flights, 40 times up and down the stairs in 35-degree heats?
God.
Yeah.
So Toby and I, we used to live. This was when we were in university, and we first moved in together when we were outside of the old halls experience, which you've got to have as a student, I think.
Yep.
So we moved into this flat, and the lift is broken, so it's up 6 flights of stairs, and this really like horrible, really run-down building that was probably office space in like the 50s, and someone's just turned it into student accommodation. When I say turned it into student accommodation, I mean they've put a sign on the outside that says student accommodation and put beds in the rooms, and they've changed nothing else.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a horrible place, and we have to carry it. And of course, there's nowhere to park because it's on a main road. It's on like one of the main sort of in-city roads in Liverpool. So we had to sort of rush all of our stuff either from the really horrible back street that is just filled with
rats mainly,
bottles and vomit and rats, and I mean they call it Piss Alley.
It does have a name, doesn't it?
And it's called that for a good reason.
Yeah.
So just carrying all that stuff up 6 flights of stairs, all of it just bag after bag, like you can't have any kind of trolley. It's just nightmare.
Talking 35-degree heats here as well, hottest day of the year.
And yeah, it would have been the middle of summer as well.
And
so
at least 30, 40 trips each for the amount of stuff that was coming out of our flat. So that was an incredible... you really feel the pain of moving when you've been through that. It's mental.
Yeah. Can't get much worse than that.
But yeah, sorry.
So yeah, that was Dan. That was Dan this week. Thanks very much for your email.
Yeah, cheers.
Let's move on to Aaron. I'm not sure if Aaron has contacted us before. I can only apologise if you have and I've forgotten. I don't think so though. He's just saying that he brings up a point about the difference in Avon's behaviour as the show goes along, and I think he brings up an interesting point here. So he says, quote, "One of the things that has always struck me when watching the show back is the difference in behaviour of Avon from Season 1 to Season 3. One example is him going along for the attempted hit at the diner in moral midgetry. Thinking back to Season 1, he was very cautious and bordering on paranoia, almost to Marlowe levels, such as the time Weebay picked him up from one of his girlfriend's house and wondering whether the hockey kids on the street are there to kill him. Yet this season he seems a lot more reckless, especially as he's now just out of prison on parole. I don't feel the Avon of the first season would go along for the hit or let himself get caught with all the guns and ammo when he finally gets rearrested." And then he goes on to say a little bit more about how it was disappointing for him to see Avon, probably being his favourite character on the show, not displaying the same intelligence that he had in the early days. Is this, would you say, Toby, a flaw in the way the character has been portrayed, or is a natural progression based on what's happened?
I don't massively agree, to be honest. Because I don't think much of it is really externalized by the... Avon doesn't really mention this. I mean, he internalizes most of this, but the circumstances are so different when he's out of prison. Think about all that muscle he had in Season 1. He had Weebay, he had Little Man, he had Stinkum, Bird. I mean, he's now left with, like, Gerard and Sapper. Slim Charles is a great strategist, but they want to keep him in office so that he stays alive, and Cutty was a little bit of a glimmer of hope, but still none, and Stringer has changed the game beyond any recognition for him, and there's just desperate times, really, that desperate measures. Not that Avon's going to remove his pride by mentioning this stuff, but I think it really is these desperate measures that are causing him to make these somewhat short-sighted moves, particularly going on the stakeout to that Lake Trout, whatever it was, last episode, with Chris and Snoop, where he nearly died. Yeah, I think it's certainly a different Avon, but a very understandable different Avon, considering the circumstances that have changed. So that's certainly my take on it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I would add that Avon, you do get a sense that Avon comes out of prison with more to prove as well. And this is embodied in a very... I described it to Aaron as like a devil may care attitude. The scene where they're driving away from when he's been released and he kind of throws his prison clothes out of the window. It's like, I think that's kind of a good start of what we're about to see. Like, this is more of an Avon who, like you say, needs to take slightly more rash action, needs to have a slightly more reckless attitude in order to get by, because... As you say, especially all the work that Stringer has done, it's completely changed the strengths and weaknesses of the organisation. Yeah,
I think that's a really good point you make about him needing to make his mark again. Like, from what we know about Avon, the worst thing that could happen to him is people start forgetting who he is. So he needs to come back and make some real moves and make himself known on the street again. In case 2 years is enough to drift someone gradually into anonymity, and I think that's possibly another good way of explaining it as well.
It's more than him being out of prison. It's he is back on the street. It's not so much he's out of prison, it's that he is back.
Yeah. And
he wants to make this big mark. And I think it's difficult, because I do think that it's Aaron makes a point about him not displaying the same intelligence, and to some extent it is a lack of sound thinking going into his actions. He is being more reckless. It is going to lead him towards more trouble, and eventually, sure enough, it does land him back in handcuffs. So it is definitely a lack of intelligence to some extent.
Yeah,
and obviously it's disappointing that it can be disappointing to see what is your favourite character on the show take quite a hit like that.
Oh,
but I don't think it's entirely unjustified by the events of the show.
No, definitely. Certainly right about it being unintelligent moves, but I'd say that it's more because, he's thinking more with his heart now than he was with his brain back when he had the chance to think with his brain. He had room to breathe, like he doesn't now.
Maybe he also feels that he clearly still respects Stringer, and he knows that he's capable of making certain moves to ensure the security of the business. I mean, that's partly why he goes along with Stringer here to, not say anything about D'Angelo to Brianna, even though he knows, is that he knows that he understands how to protect the business, and he knows that Stringer is particularly good at that.
Yeah.
So maybe he trusts him more to some extent to protect him on his behalf.
Yeah.
And that he can take these actions, and that he will still be safe in the same way that he was before, but combined with that, the recklessness of his desire to prove his return to the street.
Definitely. But no, that's a really good point from Aaron, because I don't hear that criticism thrown at the show at all, actually. It's an interesting observation that definitely made me think about the way Avon changes through the show. Yeah.
We had another email here from a chap named Michael, whichever he prefers to be known as. I think we've had contact from him before, or perhaps a different Michael. Let me find out. It's the same Michael, yeah. He was letting us know that he's enjoying the Season 3 recaps and discussion, which is good to hear. He says that he's enjoying it so much that despite having some other shows to watch, including True Detective and The Affair and Hannibal at the moment, that he started rewatching The Wire from Season 1, Episode 1. So I don't think there's any shame in that. Anyone who would rather watch The Wire than something else is always welcome on this podcast.
I've been in that boat so many times. The number of shows that I'm meant to have started following recommendations and The Wire just comes crawling back. It's, I know the pain.
He also says, quote, "The reason for my email is that I was about to splurge on the new Blu-ray box set when I noticed that Sky On Demand has all 5 seasons in 69 HD and looks great. It is available until September and could save people some cash. So just to let you know that if you have access to that or you're looking for it instead of getting the Blu-ray box set, that it is available on Sky On Demand in the new HD version, and it's available until September, as Michael pointed out.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just to let you know, thanks for making us aware of that.
Yeah, cheers. No, it's the first time that the HD widescreen version of The Wire has come to the UK, I believe. Obviously, you need to have a Sky subscription and stuff, but once you've got it, yep, unencumbered Wire.
And we had another email here. There's still a couple more yet. We had an email from Ben, who was at first asking why season 1 and 2 weren't on the iTunes podcasts. And just in case any of you don't know, you probably do know if you've reached this stage, but we have had to keep the current season as the one on the iTunes podcast just for bandwidth reasons. We used to have all of them on there, but then we just kept hitting the limit each week, and then it meant that people weren't able to access them at all. So we thought it'd be better if people could at least listen to the current season uninterrupted and get all the rest of the episodes, which are available on the YouTube or on the YouTube channel or on the website. You can still get all of the other episodes, just not on the iTunes stream.
Yeah, I can understand the frustration though, because that podcasts app on the smartphones is really useful. You can just kind of store all the stuff there and let it all go one by one. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately we're not able to do that at the moment. Hopefully down the line we'll have a few more resources on our backs to let them all fly up there on the podcast on iTunes.
Ben then follows up by hitting us with a pretty big question. He says, well, I just cut straight to the question where he says, "Who is your favourite character?"
Oof.
And he says, "Stringer, D'Angelo, Michael, Marlowe, and Bunk are all epic, but he can't look past Omar."
Well, if those are our options, maybe that would be easier. But it's
if we have to pick out of those,
because it's an incredible question. Otherwise, we could be here for the whole podcast. What were the options again? It was.
Well, he mentions Stringer, D'Angelo, Michael, Marlowe, and Bunk, and then Omar as a sort of exceptional example. I can only assume
Michael, Marlowe, Bunk, and Omar. So Stringer, D'Angelo, Michael, Marlowe, Bunk, and Omar. Right. Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
Wow, it's quite a set. Have you chosen one, Alex?
This is just too difficult. I don't even know where to begin.
We should pause and come back. So Stringer, D'Angelo, Michael, Marlowe. Oof. It's got to be between Stringer and Marlowe, I think, for me.
It's difficult as well because when you talk about favourite, you also have to consider how much impact they have individually on the whole show and how much they feature. And you're talking about someone like D'Angelo who features in a season and a little bit, and then you have Bunk, who is like a really rock solid character throughout the whole show, and is used as like a really excellent supporting character and having his little moments now and then.
Yeah, although he hasn't appeared.
You have someone like
he hasn't appeared in the last couple
he's not
episodes.
appeared that much recently. But he does have that kind of like sort of something about like being a foundation in certain parts of the show. He's like a good bouncing off point for a lot of the more prominently featured characters.
He's sort of the show's comfort blanket. He's the one that's always there, being keeping everyone happy, being funny, being very likable, but never necessarily being that integral to the plot. He often sort of sits in the background for a lot of what happens.
And then you have a character like Stringer, who lasts 3 seasons and has this really important, really rising story, this incredible arc of a boom and bust, if you like. And then you have someone like Michael, who's in one season, pretty much.
He's got quite a lot in 5.
I suppose he's got a fair bit, yeah,
Yeah.
but not in the same way that he does in 4.
No.
Like, in terms of like being featured as like a an important character, it's really all about what he does in 4, but it's it's one hell of a performance, and it's a really interesting look into how other characters that we've seen might have started themselves, and that says a lot about what's going on in season 4 and about how it is about trying to fix the problem at the source with the children. And so it's very difficult to really say who is your favourite character, because you have to be more specific in order to get a worthwhile answer.
Yeah, I think I'd have said Stringer a few watches ago, but every time I rewatch The Wire, Stringer goes down in my estimation as a character. And Avon is the one who kind of replaces what I lose with Stringer. But yeah, I think in terms of an arc of those bunch, Stringer has the best and most detailed arc. Particularly from what he learns in season 1, he's not massively used in season 1, but you see him learn so much, and then he puts that into practice in season 2, and then really follows through with it in season 3, and his appearances gradually become more and more long, and he becomes a more established character. It's a really, really nicely done arc, perhaps more so than anyone else's possibly in the show.
The other thing about choosing favourite characters, it depends on. Sometimes it can just depend what mood you're in.
Yeah,
or,
exactly.
If you tend to gravitate towards characters that are wise or witty or snarky or have more emotional depth, or
I often lean to
it's-
Partlow as well. He seems always, in terms of memorable characters, he always seems to pop in my mind as does old Chris Partlow.
wait, it's the show's biggest murderer.
Yeah, show's biggest murderer, not to be overlooked, because I mean he doesn't have many speaking lines in the show, but there's something about the contrast of his personality with his actual actions, and it is a fascinating character. It's really fascinating. So we could be here all night just sort of bringing up various people that come to mind, but it might be best to perhaps save it for a later podcast when we've formulated a good idea of who the ultimate character might be.
But thanks anyway, Ben. It was good to receive your email, and it's just a bit of a tough question.
Yeah.
Tough question to answer, really, especially without taking up an entire podcast. Let's move on to our final email, which is from Alfred, again, regular contributor. Good to hear from him again. He sends us a news article about a particular cop from Baltimore who has been using Twitter to reveal sort of micro tales about the sort of things that he saw whilst on the job. And it's an interview with him, and he talks about the sort of things that he saw and the kind of corruption and that's going on. And obviously this is a more... this is probably going on around roughly the same time that the show was on. He says that he joined in 2003 and that he was a sergeant at the time that he retired. So we kind of saw that street level thing and upwards. So it's a really interesting read. I'll probably post a link to it on the blog so that you guys can see it as well. It's really interesting, though. Just quite a Twitter feed. He just talks about some of the things that he saw, like a detective slapping a completely innocent female in the face for bumping into him coming out of a corner chicken store.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, so it's not going to be the lightest of reads, I guess, but it's certainly going to be interesting and a good companion piece for the show, quite possibly as well.
Yeah, it's quite lengthy, but it's a good interview, and it gives you an insight into just how dysfunctional it really is. Like,
Yeah.
so yeah, that was a really good link. I'll post the links that Alfred sent us up onto the website so you guys can see it as well, and to the actual Twitter feed itself. And the guy's name is Michael Wood, I believe it is. Michael A. Wood, that's the one.
Okay.
So yeah, I will post a link to that. And also, I believe that he's been a guest on the Joe Rogan Experience.
Oh,
I think Tom messaged me and told me about that.
That's right, yeah. So
The most recent one, he's been a guest on it, so I might check that out as well. I don't really listen to Joe Rogan Experience anymore, but
yeah, if you guys...
sometimes they might have one guest, and I'll be like, yeah, I'll check that one out.
So yeah, if you guys have the podcasts app, I think it's one of the most popular podcasts on iTunes, actually.
Yeah, it's huge, yeah.
Certainly in the top 30 or so. Yeah, so every week he never interviews anyone massive, or occasionally he does, but it tends to be a more select crowd. But yeah, so
It's crazy how many It's crazy how many episodes it has now as well. I remember when I think the first episode I listened to was like, I don't know, late 100 and something, 200 and something. I can't really remember now. It wasn't like near the start, but it was like quite some time ago. Now there's like 700 episodes.
That's
nearly.
ridiculous.
And they're all like 3-4 hours long.
How much
So
is
if
life?
you like long form podcasts
Yeah.
with Joe Rogan, that kind of humor or that kind of style, then if you've never listened to it before, then prepare to have your all other podcasts taken away from you.
Definitely. All right. I'm raring to jump into our recap because we've got a lot to get through. The most that we've ever had to get through.
Well, hopefully you've condensed some of the larger sections a little bit.
We'll see.
Otherwise, you might be reading more than we're analysing.
Quite possibly. There are 22 sections, so not too far beyond what we're used to. 2 of them are rather large, which I might try and gloss over, but the rest should be fairly manageable. Our big sections are the major cases unit, which goes on for pretty much half the podcast, I imagine. Then there's Cutty, there's the Western District, which takes a bit of a backseat this week compared to previous weeks. The politics and the Barksdale have a lot to say as well this week. And of course Omar has a little moment that we'll finish off with. So let's kick things off with the major cases unit, and I'm going to do this big section with a kind of D'Agostino sandwich. So we're going to start off with the D'Agostino stuff and end with the D'Agostino stuff, much as the episode does. So as the show starts, Jimmy is awoken in the middle of the night by a call from Teresa, who invites him to her hotel room. He tells his son Sean that he's leaving and gives him a number to call. McNulty leaves quickly after meeting with D'Agostino, telling her that he has to return to his kids. But he does ask her if they can have at least dinner next time. When he returns home, he tries to watch the same political show that she was watching, but is soon bored and changes to a war documentary.
So this is our opening scene with McNulty continuing to do some rather questionable parenting.
Yeah, it's a bit of a throw-off, isn't it? The show's expanding with so many major themes and issues this season, and here we are being reminded that Terry and McNulty do like to get it on once in a while, and of course McNulty likes to be a bad parent once in a while as well. So, yeah, absolutely. And it's just sort of straight out of bed. It's an interesting opening, and he just grabs that watch, and on he goes to the hotel. There's no hesitation. And
Things get a little bit more literal with our 9/11/War on Terror themes as well, as we see that political broadcast where it's, I assume it's like a sort of Democrat political speaker and a Republican political speaker going at it about Kerry and Bush.
That's right.
And sort of post-election analysis.
they're talking about Rust Belt versus, I guess Sun Belt is the opposite of that in terms of American politics. And obviously the Rust Belt is very much the post-industrial cities of the Northeast mainly. Detroit, Baltimore are 2 really big ones, and again it's probably feeding into a lot of what the show talks about. Obviously that feeds well into the season 2 themes as well. But yeah, it certainly does want to more directly talk about the Iraq War here as well. And yeah, definitely. And speaking of the blue versus red thing with the Republican Democrat, I sort of feel like perhaps Avon and Stringer could get involved here as the 2 sides of the coin. I don't know which way you could interpret either of them. I think both of them could pass for being either Republican or Democrat in terms of a larger scale. But I know that last episode that they referred to themselves as colours, like it was bleeding red and seeing green, I think, and certainly tried to make me link anything of potential together.
I was thinking as well that the lingering shot on the war documentary was perhaps pointing out something to do with the war on terror and going in to invade certain areas and learning from the mistakes of history, and how, despite however good you think what it is that you're doing in order to go to war, you're still causing the deaths of tens of thousands of people just by the nature of invading some place. So it seemed like it was trying to bring out some lesson through the TV programs.
Yeah, and I did like how uninterested McNulty was, particularly as he is like a major player in the war on drugs, as it were. something that he's working so closely with, but he really has no interest in the wider macro politics of it all. It's just, it just kind of speaks more to McNulty being all about solving those cases and not really understanding how the dots connect necessarily. And I think that's something that the episode brings up again later on at the end when he has dinner with D'Agostino, and they set it up quite nicely here.
He tries to make an effort to bring something more to their relationship as well, I suppose. It seems like, despite everything, he's developing a certain amount of self-respect.
Yeah, I mean, it was nice to see him throw himself out. He tossed himself out, as he put it, with quite a tempting proposition, I'm sure, for him. I'm sure he was thinking of his kids, but it was nice that he at least didn't cross that line. Like, he did go home, which does feel like some sort of improvement for McNulty.
So yeah, that's our opening scene.
Yeah, I guess we don't learn much. We learn that McNulty now has a bed. I don't think it's the first time we've ever seen his bed. He used to just have a mattress in a room. So he's gradually developing life, as Lester puts it. Life, Jimmy.
Yeah, exactly. But otherwise, a fairly, I don't know, not a particularly grandiose opening scene.
No, yeah, it's...
Maybe we've just been treated to quite a few quite serious or impactful opening scenes, and this is a fairly average opening scene, I suppose.
Yeah, pretty average, although I believe the wiki said it's the longest opening in the whole show, so...
It is quite long as well, yeah.
So they do...
And a lot of time spent watching, you're sort of watching a screen, and the camera is watching another screen. You're sort of spending time looking at stuff on TV. So it's kind of unusual in that regard.
Or we're watching a naked Teresa watching TV for a lot of it as well. So, but yeah, it's kind of a cool opening. Definitely a bit of a throw off. They normally start with a big Hamsterdam sort of set piece or something, but we just wanted to go for that. I guess it's kind of a McNulty episode really as well. A lot of what happens here focuses on McNulty and his development, so it makes sense to kick things off with him. Yeah.
So should we move on to the next section?
Yep, sure. Okay, so next up, McNulty goes into work on Sunday as he no longer has his children to spend time with. He finds Lester and Prez preparing for undercover work. They plan to put a camera on Stringer Bell's copy shop. Freeman refuses McNulty's offer of help, telling him he's a known face. McNulty espouses a theory that the major case unit contains the best investigators in the entire department. He lists other detectives he respects. Freeman asks him how he thinks their work is going to end and tells him that being good at his job will not save him. McNulty clings to the belief that a good case is enough, but Freeman tells him that he needs a life outside of work. McNulty seems to reflect on this, noting a photograph of, among others, Beady.
So this is quite a, I don't know, somewhat prosaic but also valuable life lesson from Freeman here about having more than just what's going on with your job. This is somewhat of a wake-up call for McNulty. It seems very appropriate that he should be there looking at the photographs on the fridge, and he sees Beady there, and that is a sign of things to come, as we know, and that there is stability to be found in his life there.
Yeah, very strong foreshadowing.
And this is all couched in McNulty's arrogance about how great they are, basically.
Yeah, it was quite an odd scene, and there was a big gap between how Lester perceived McNulty here and how McNulty perceived himself, and it was in a very funny mood. I think he was obviously on a bit of a high after his night with D'Agostino, and he sort of strolled into work feeling really positive about his work, and
he's feeling very righteous coming in on a Sunday after having done the right thing with Teresa.
Exactly.
Yeah, he sees guys working hard, and he's here to do the same, and just feeling a bit righteous.
I think he felt that his life was getting back on track. He's got the work. He got at least what he thought was a family brewing, and nope, Lester's gonna bring you back down to earth, I'm afraid, mate. So yeah, but I mean, I did like how the show really established the Sunday morning thing. It's a really small factor, but through all the scenes at the first sort of half of the episode, it was this Sunday morning theme that ran through, like Terry not having anything to do the next day, and the deacon being on his way to church, and
it was good that they did that because it made it not seem out of nowhere.
Yeah.
It was actually a running, established element of the show, like this Sunday morning.
Yeah, it was really cool. No, I think most people had their own sort of Sunday thing to do, which was nice. Yeah, but it annoyed me how he ignored Prez so much in this scene as well. He just completely Leicester-centric about his, mentioning how great the police force is in certain areas.
He certainly seems a little more contemplative about Prez later on when Landsman is discussing it with Norris. Is it he's talking to?
Yeah, he's being a little bit inappropriate, really.
Obtuse.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way of putting it. And he just seems to respect Leicester's skills for very good reasons, but not Prez's. Perhaps a bit of a foreshadowing yet again there, but I don't think he realises quite how much or how integral Prez is to the whole operation. He does so much behind the scenes. We get the impression anyway. And I think he whistles at Prez later on, doesn't he? Sort of when he needs someone to watch Stringer, he just sort of whistles at Prez, go and watch the laptop. And I just kind of feel that's not the nicest thing to do, McNulty.
Well, he's not the nicest guy.
No, but he normally has, he's kind of an arsehole in ways that aren't that basic. He's a bit more of a defier rather than just someone who, in your face, is rude to people. So, but yeah, it was nice how that Lester caught his rant on the webcam as he was ranting about how great Baltimore police was, and very silently undercut the power of that speech by having it on the webcam, and then there's a sort of chuckling and grinning behind the computer. Unbeknownst to McNulty.
It's another screens within screens moment as well.
That's true. We don't see many of those in this season, but it was nice to...
I mean, The Wire has always had a thing about putting characters in the frame within other frames. Anybody who's seen that video that we posted quite some time ago, the Style in The Wire video essay, that talks a lot about putting characters within frames, within other frames. Characters being framed by windows and doors, and things being captured between pillars and posts, and making the shot appear widescreen by cutting out the bottom or the sides, or So it's been a running thing, but it's nice that visual style has come into putting screens within screens as well. And it's obviously happened a few times within this episode. Certainly not the first time, but
yeah.
It's interesting that they opt to use it again here.
Yeah, that is really nice.
And like you say, it's like McNulty giving a speech, isn't it? He's kind of being filmed, doing this little performance of his arrogance.
It kind of makes Lester's take on it a bit more apparent. The fact that it's all grandstanding and there's not really much truth behind it. And particularly if you really analyse what he's saying and what you've seen of the show, like McNulty's a good police, but there's not one thing that McNulty's done this season that Lester didn't beat him to. And that includes when he was being all righteous about following Stringer. Like, Freeman had actually got a lot further following Stringer, but just wasn't making any hullabaloo about it. So I don't know why he's quite stealing all the glory for himself. It's very McNulty of him to do. So
this is another one of those times as well where you get a real sense that Freeman was very much like McNulty when he was younger, and that he can see a lot of himself in McNulty.
Yeah.
Which is probably why he feels so compelled to dish out a lot of this advice.
Yeah, temper him down.
I mean, certainly, Freeman is the kind of guy who likes to be very wise and sage-like around everyone that he is, but he's very particularly like that with McNulty. There's a lot of advice and mentoring going on.
Definitely, and
in a more disappointed father kind of way than he does with, say, Prez, where he's a little more like a basic teacher.
Yeah. I think McNulty's a little bit more of a force to reckon with than most of the rest of the detail.
He's the awkward child.
Yeah, definitely. So he has to really stand up to him, which he does well. And I like how this scene comes immediately after the one with Colvin and the Deacon. So it's quite a nice parallel where Colvin is concerned with making a short-term difference with Hamsterdam. That's to feel like his work matters. And both McNulty and Colvin are put in their places by those older and wiser in those situations where you've got to think more about the long term. You've got to think about what this really means for you later on, whether it's going to fill you up. So it's quite nice that they drew a link between those. It's probably
all right.
It's probably worth mentioning the Ed Burns mention as well. It's a classic kind of meta Wire moment where.
That's true, yeah.
Ed Burns, I believe all the names are genuine police officers who are well respected from the BPD. But yeah.
So taking opportunity to do some name dropping there.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is BD's first appearance in the season, right? When we see her on the fridge, at least.
If you can call it that.
Yeah. So it's kind of cool. And immediately underneath BD is they've also fridge magneted a Chinese takeaway menu. Don't know if that's some sort of foreshadowing for the later scene, but I quite enjoyed that. And there's also a crazy picture of McNulty smiling like a maniac underneath, which is probably worth checking out if you missed it.
I mean, I've said before, there's no way. I mean, there's so many things that are very carefully placed in the wire. I refuse to believe that something like that would be done by accident. Like.
Yeah, so that was cool to see. All right. Anything else to say about that scene? It was quite an important one, I guess.
No, that's about it from me.
Okay. All right. So next up, Daniels meets with the detail on Monday morning. Rhonda is there to discuss the legal requirements of setting up wiretaps on the Barksdale organisation's disposable phones. Greggs and Sidner also join the Sunday detectives. McNulty and Greggs are assigned the task of showing that they are unable to infiltrate the Barksdale crews using undercover detectives or confidential informants. Freeman and Prez are asked to start typing the wiretap affidavits in preparation. Sidner is assigned the task of tracing Bernard, so they know when the new phones are coming in. Officer Massey is on vacation, but Daniels hopes that she will man the camera that Freeman and Prez have set up and note Stringer's movements. Perlman tells the details she's going to argue with the cell phone companies to try and get the wiretaps set up more quickly. And Daniels reminds the unit that the wiretaps will be short-lived even when they do get them up and running. And then we have the first moment where McNulty tries to call D'Agostino and gets nowhere. So
a lot of things moving in the major case unit. Basically, they're setting up various modes of operations, assigning people to various duties.
Yeah,
moving us into position for various successes and failures of the major case unit later in the season.
Definitely.
Although Sidner kind of succeeds on his end.
Yeah, it's pretty cool to see him back in action, and there's a nice, typically wire set of scenes really where each element of the unit are doing their own thing to create the whole investigation.
Yeah.
So it's nice that they're finally at a stage where they can put all those things into motion. This is really the first big move they've made as the unit following Stringer again. And yeah, Sidner seems to have the most success, although he does probably have the most simple task and the most physical task, which is what we know of Sidner. I guess he's kind of replaced Herc and Carver really as their more kind of recon guy. And it's nice to see Bernard and Squeak again, whose choice of rental car isn't quite high-end enough for Squeak to be satisfied with, so we get another humorous interlude.
She seems quite permanently dissatisfied.
Yeah, it's a great factor with them. I love the way their plot kind of ends or climaxes with the. It's one of the funniest lines in the whole show. Actually, it's I can't wait to go to prison. That's it. I remember that. It's just hilarious. Yeah. It really feels earned after all that Squeak's put him through.
It's a really funny little arc.
Definitely.
The show just kind of gifts you through these small moments. It's a nice. This is another little dipping into that, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. And we see McNulty and Greggs on Bubs trying to get them to use burners, and then Freeman and Prez doing their classic house cat stuff and paper trail. And then, of course, Daniels and Perlman actually doing perhaps the more tricky negotiation stuff with is it Verizon or some sort of burner company?
Yeah, something wireless.
Yeah, Whiz Wireless or something. And they're a lot more tricky than expected. Bureaucracy letting people down again. So, yeah, just kind of checking in with everyone, I guess.
Well, we see a lot in this episode of various things being done through either favours or corruption or coercion or money making. All these kind of political manoeuvres through which all the bureaucracy is a bit of a facade for. And we see that here with the communications where, 30 days, that's the fastest that we can do. But as soon as she threatens to, smear the company name with the problem, suddenly 4 or 5 days is the fastest that they can do. So, it's that kind of whole deal, like with Cutty later on, where he's trying to get the permits for his gym. He gets nowhere until he's able to kind of use somebody's name, and suddenly that's leverage, and suddenly all of these things that seem impossible seem perfectly doable, which presumably they must have been all along.
Exactly, yeah. It's quite a worrying thing that, as you mentioned, we see a few times, particularly in this episode. But we will.
Ain't no fiction about it. I mean, it's not. There's no mystery to it anymore. It's not. It's not a big secret that if you want to get things done quickly, you've got to have money or some kind of political capital or some means of bribing someone. You know, it's a means of getting things done quickly, sadly.
And I'm sure we'll get to that stuff later on as well.
Yeah.
All right, so let's quickly move on. So we're going to look at the Greggs and McNulty bit first. So they pay Bubbles to act as a confidential informant. They give him money to buy enough drugs to force the Vincent Street Barksdale crew to phone him for a re-up. And he wears a wire. Bubbles asks if he can keep the drugs, and Greggs tells him he cannot. So he approaches Bodie's crew, buys 30 vials, and when Bodie gets suspicious, he claims that he got the money from his business selling the white T-shirts, which is quite clever. And Bubbles even negotiates a discount with Bodie for the bulk buy. And as McNulty and Greggs listen in from the car, they're impressed with Bubbles' business acumen. And McNulty again tries to reach D'Agostino, but cannot get through to her. And Greggs actually asks him about the relationship, and he's positive despite all his difficulty getting in touch. So that's our time we spend with those guys.
So Bubbles, like you say, they're impressed with him using his head. 2 instances here. First, in order to get himself out of any trouble, because he's got a pretty good reason for having his money, what with his cart full of white T-shirts. Presumably, Bodie is quite happy to buy that he's made enough money to get himself 300.
Yeah, which we know he hasn't because, well, maybe he has, but it certainly isn't being loud about it. McNulty and Greggs obviously gave him what he needed, but it's certainly thinking quick on his feet.
And then, of course, he is able to do another classic Bowles manoeuvre and make himself a little bit of money in the process by getting that discount, and thus is able to not spend so much on us, because if he can't keep the drugs, he can at least keep some of the money.
Yeah, it's really Bubbles at his best. I love this scene, and I think it says just as much about Bodie as it says about Bubbles, because you can really appreciate both aspects of the characters. And from season 1, you could never have seen Bodie entertaining negotiations like this, just going off on one in season 1. And that Stringer business mentality is really shining through now, and it's a pleasure to sort of watch him as he's growing up. It really feels like he is maturing.
Well, aren't they? Is Bodie's is in Hamsterdam at this point?
Yeah,
is he?
Bodie's very committed to the Hamsterdam side of things, which obviously.
So that's also having an effect, because I guess he may be in a slightly more forgiving or magnanimous mood to people where they know they can get all of this business hassle-free anyway.
Yeah.
So in a way, I guess to some extent, a lot of the reason with the cost that comes with selling an illegal product is the risk to the seller.
Mm.
So if there's lowered risk, then to some extent you could have a lower price as well.
Yeah, and I guess he's also now in an environment where violence is not tolerated. So obviously the easiest way to resolve a dispute like this is to offer the bulk buy.
Carrot and the stick, as Colvin says.
Yeah, so it's really cool to see that, and you sense that Stringer really has shaped a lot of who he is at this point, and that's why he's really fascinated by Hamsterdam as much as Stringer is, in a way that Avon would never be able to get involved with. So it's cool that Bodie really is one of Stringer's minions. He really isn't kind of involved with Barksdale as it stands at the moment with the Avon jurisdiction.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so cool scene with Bubbles, and I love the line where he's like, "You give me the chills, you do that to me, Kima." It's just a pretty fantastic moment. And I
think that's about it for the Bubbles bit, though. I think.
Yeah.
I suppose there's when McNulty again tries to reach D'Agostino, and again, sort of doesn't want to leave a message. That's about as far as he can get, but otherwise seems to say that it's going well to Greggs, and I guess he eventually does get there in the end.
Yeah, he's like
but not quite in the way that he might have hoped, as I'm sure we'll discuss.
Yeah, we will certainly. He sort of says "so far so good" to Kima at this point, which Kima's face is not pleased with. Like, you can read through the bullshit. But I think it's going better than Kima realizes, because obviously he spent his previous day with her, or at least previous evening. And dinner is apparently on the cards. He's hoping that at some stage she will accept, as she does. Okay. Alright, so Daniels and Perlman now. So we've kind of been over this, but they meet with an executive from the cell phone company who insists it would take 30 days to respond to a court order for a wiretap. Following the outrage with the audacity of the company in selling a phone that can be used anonymously and is well suited to drug traffickers and then holding up court-ordered wiretaps, She threatens the company with a public statement that they are deliberately protecting drug dealers from investigation, and the executive quickly caves in and promises a 4 to 5 day turnaround.
So yeah, we kind of already covered this bit, didn't we? Just saying how all of a sudden it suddenly becomes a lot easier. So you can assume it's that easy in the first place. They're just putting these restrictions in to protect themselves and to make it easier. And
So they can be
we've mentioned before how one of the show's key themes is about institutions being designed to protect themselves.
Yeah, it's why not coast? You know, if you can.
Yeah,
and that's kind of what we're seeing here. Is if they really did put in the effort that the resources that they actually had, they could get things done a lot more efficiently.
it also shows how important an asset Perlman is to the detail. She proves this time and time again. But having such such a close confidant in Perlman has proved very important here, because I don't think Daniels would have, maybe he might have had the spirit to do a similar thing. He wouldn't have had the same ability to make that threat. So
That's a very good point, yeah. And
whereas Perlman being, what is she, the assistant state's attorney at this stage?
Yeah, she's basically a public sector lawyer, and she obviously knows the ins and outs better than anyone of what they can do in terms of their leverage. And
but she's also more in a position to make a statement like that, whereas Daniels is just a unit commander.
Yeah.
Whereas she's, like a sort of an important figure within the city's law enforcement on, a sort of judge, lawyer kind of level. I mean, I don't know enough about law to speak about it in many specifics, but she seems kind of important, is what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So important enough to be able to make a statement like that and have it be visited by the media, and for it to have a certain amount of leverage, which basically Daniels wouldn't have been in a position to do. So it's another moment where Perlman is valuable to them, even if you kind of exclude the whole their relationship thing.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cheating in terms of favours for favours, but there we are.
Yeah, although I think Daniels' "This Is Bullshit" was pretty damn intimidating as well, but obviously didn't quite have the lawyer know-how to back it up.
Yeah, I'm sure it would take more than that to intimidate a high-powered CEO. Yeah. I don't know if it is a CEO or just some executive.
Yeah,
but,
someone certainly.
Someone important in the company, no doubt.
Yeah. All right, so moving on. Next, they meet with FBI Supervisor Amanda Reese and Fitzhugh to ask for assistance. Fitz and Reese are unable to offer help because counter-terrorism and political corruption remain their priority over drug dealers, and they have had little success with wireless companies in the past. After tracking Bernard, buying mobile phones, Cisner reports into Freeman at the unit headquarters. He tells Freeman and Prez that Bernard has bought 24 cell phones from 5 locations, buying more at each stop as he gets further from Baltimore. Freeman plans to set up DNRs on all the phones. McNulty and Prez leave to get Chinese food for the rest of the unit. So a few little things here.
Yeah, a couple of small bits. We see Fitzhugh again, who's popped in once more, although he's of little help this time. It's interesting that they come in to tell them that. I feel like it's a conversation they could have had over the phone. They kind of came all of that way to come into the office to tell them, yeah, we can't help you.
That's true. Were they not setting up some sort of FBI tech or something?
Not that I could see. It was literally just them having a chat. And when I see it again, I just think, couldn't they have just called them up and asked them, and then they could have told them that over the phone without having to come all the way down?
Yeah, that's true. It's one of the few times where it seems that they kind of make
it doesn't seem like they
sacrifices.
happen to be there,
Yeah. Maybe he's repaying his debt still, Fitzhugh, after what he did in last season.
It's showing him a bit of respect by showing his face, I suppose.
Yeah.
But you think it would be in the interest of the major case unit to, despite all of these things, wanting to get it done promptly in order to, if they can make a move, let's come and do it. And if they can't, let's not waste any time over it.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
I quite like how Fitzhugh sort of says that his boss only touches himself at the mention of political corruption.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times Fitzhugh actually says this in the series, but it's kind of his catchphrase. And it's at least every time he's on screen by the sounds of it. But he is sort of painting getting work done as a sexual fascination. And it's I think Stringer says it as well later on. He says, one hand's in my pocket, the other's on your dick. And it's just kind of blurring the lines between sexual fantasy and money. And it's pretty a big theme of the show.
And the last time we saw Reese would have been what, the stuff with the Greeks?
Yeah,
in season
she
two?
got involved with season 2 a fair bit. I think she's in season 1 as well, in the final negotiation where they become the empty suits. So she's kind of in terms of the FBI characters, she's the sort of second after Fitzhugh, and she appears a fair bit. So yeah, it's cool to keep track of these little characters who you probably wouldn't sort of notice on a first time round, but the faces that keep popping up. So yeah, it's cool to see.
And then we had the bit with Sidner doing his tracking down. As you said before, he's become the recon man to some extent in the absence of Herc and Carver. And he does his job, and he gets the number of phones and passes on the information to Friedman.
Yeah.
And then we have the start of a very bad decision, or certainly an unfortunate decision on the part of Prez at the very least.
Yeah, with the Chinese and it's cool to mention though in terms of like the phone buying and them obviously picking up on the fact that they're getting sloppy. It's quite a big chain of responsibility there in terms of Shamrock making it very visible that they don't check the receipts, which is then tempting Squeak to get Bernard to go and make less stops or fewer stops, and Stringer obviously delegating that task to begin with was possibly a bad idea. So we can kind of see how gradually the things are slipping in the Barksdale and lots of signs are pointing towards their demise. It's nice to see the detail kind of getting ahead really for the first time.
Yeah, they definitely sort of in that time, because we have been spending a lot of time with the Barksdales and everything. We get a sense that they have stalled somewhat, and as a result, the detail have had an opportunity to catch up.
Yeah, absolutely, and so much so that they want some Chinese, as you say, and it's an awful decision, unfortunately.
Shall we move on to said following scene?
Yeah. So this is the kind of pre-math as opposed to the aftermath. So Prez and McNulty wait for their food outside the restaurant and listen to the police radio. An emergency request for backup is called, and realizing they are close, the detectives rush to the location. They hear shots fired and Prez drops McNulty off. McNulty hears more shots and rushes in their direction. He finds Prez standing over a dead body. Uniforms arrive at the scene and McNulty finds a badge on the body. Prez tells McNulty that he saw the gun and fired. As other detectives arrive at the scene, McNulty identifies that the dead man is a Plaincoves officer by revealing his badge that was hanging around his neck. Then the other detectives angrily identify him as Derek Wagoner. McNulty phones Greggs, who breaks the news to the rest of the unit. Ouch.
So after so much brilliance from Prez and how much he excels when he's able to take that almost like house cat position, as you mentioned it before, that desk work and the paper trail. As soon as he gets on the street, he just suddenly doesn't quite know how to handle himself. And it's another minor decision that leads to disaster, which is a very common favourite in the place of the Wire. Just the very fact that he just decided to go and get dinner rather than somebody else.
Yeah.
They just happened to be in place to pick up that emergency call, and they happened to be close. And that's what leads them onto that position, into a job or a sort of area of police work that Prez otherwise wouldn't be getting involved in.
Yeah, certainly. And I remember the first time I saw this, I was like, hang on a minute, why are we dwelling on this like Chinese run with McNulty and Prez? Like, it's an odd matchup in terms of character dynamics. I can't really imagine what these two would talk about. So it was quite clear from the offset that something bad was going to happen, because they really spent time on this fairly mundane activity that seemed odd that Prez was even going with in the first place. But yeah, it's pretty awful and pretty heartbreaking, and some really, really quite perhaps heavy-handed foreshadowing with the fortune cookie there. But there was something.
A new friend makes himself known.
Yeah, I do like that. Like, it was very satisfying to hear that.
I feel like that would have been a nice epigraph for the episode.
Yeah, that's very true.
In a way, like that might have been kind of nice, because then you could have had it quoted as fortune cookie.
Yeah, that's true. I think that might have ruined it a little bit, but
And of course, the new friend does make himself known.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Prez should have made himself known. He should have yelled out police, which, as we find out later on, he perhaps didn't do.
Yeah, it's not clear what happened at all. Obviously, we hear Prez's vague interpretation of it later, but we won't find out whether the guy made himself known, whether Derek made himself known, whether Prez probably obviously didn't. But yeah, it's a tragic situation. I do like the lead up to it as well. I love the Chinese food collapsing on the dashboard. That felt like a real natural blooper that they kept. It's kind of something that they perhaps didn't expect. It felt very...
You hear McNulty's...
it's just kind of... It just sort of gets cut off, doesn't it? It's great.
You can expect this very, very sauce-laden food to suddenly splash onto one's lap.
Yeah. It's a shame we didn't get to see McNulty wandering around with noodles strewn down his trousers, but admittedly it would ruin the drama of the scene. So that's perhaps one...
Yeah, that level of realism might ruin it a little bit.
Despite the plot hole. So, yeah, it was cool. I also quite liked there was a little bit more foreshadowing they did before it happened as well, when obviously Prez was doing a lot of driving around before anything happened, and he also, I think he stopped by an alleyway where he did see the guy running down the alleyway, and then a black cat sort of runs out the alleyway past the car.
Yeah, that's true.
Which I thought was really, really cool. And the cat also runs from left to right, which in Western or German folklore, if you cross paths with a cat that runs from left to right, it's kind of an omen of misfortune and evil. So that was quite a nice little sort of very subtle moment that I thought was pretty cool. And I like the fact that he's referred to on a few occasions as the guy with 9 lives. He's got 9 lives behind that Valchek shit. So,
yeah, that's true.
There's obviously a couple of
that's nice.
couple of cat things that play into his fate here. So I don't know when the moment that Prez works out that he's shot a cop. It's quite hard to say, but he's very oddly stoic and kind of just zoning out, I guess, through this scene. And it's only when McNulty picks up the badge that he perhaps knows, or perhaps he kind of had an inkling before that, a very dreadful inkling.
Well, clearly he was acting purely on instinct, and the very nature that he wasn't thinking, that he just saw a gun and fired, and at the time was probably just trying to make the area safe, and then realises what he's done. And then I think probably in that same moment, although he doesn't say it until much later on, he probably realises in that moment that not only is it quite unlikely that he's going to be able to get out of this one scot-free based on his family connections, he also perhaps realises that it's better if he doesn't.
Yeah.
Despite how much of a shame that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. So I'm sure we'll delve more into that, but I guess just before that happens, there's the scene with Greg's as she receives the bad news with that face of despair, and annoyingly we're spared the moment where she shares it with the team, but I guess we don't really need to see it. It's quite clear what's about to happen. We know that Daniels is going to dramatically get out of his seat and kind of staccato a few lines of anger and the rest of it, so yeah.
But as the audience, there's no reason for us to hear that news again.
No.
We've already seen it, so...
Exactly. Alright, so this is one of the mammoth chapters of the 2 I mentioned earlier. I'm going to try and cut some of this down because it's pretty hefty. Covers all the Prez stuff, really. So, the homicide unit handles the shooting. Prez and McNulty are both brought in to give statements. Rules, Valchek, and forced to discuss the incident. Valchek defends his son-in-law, and Rules assures him that they are not looking to burn anyone's career over the incident. Rules warns Valchek that there's a racial component to the shooting because Wagner was African American, and in the way he died, it's questionable if Prez would have opened fire had Wagner been white. Daniels interrupts to ask if Prez had seen a lawyer. Landsman tries to prevent Daniels from seeing Prez because of the legal implications. But Daniels insists that he's able to talk because he's a commanding officer. And so Landsman relents. And Daniels really urges Prez to seek out a lawyer because of the racial element, and Prez insists that it wasn't motivated by racism, fear or anger because it happened so fast. And Daniels focuses on facts and trying to fabricate facts and tries to convince Prez that he must have shouted. So Prez does not remember identifying himself as a police officer, and he asks if Wagner had a family. Daniels does not know. So we also get a bit outside the interview room with Daniels telling Landsman that Prez requested a lawyer. Daniels asks Rules to assign an officer to stay with Prez overnight as he is a suicide risk. And Valchek tries to get Daniels to back Prez over the racial issue, as Daniels is both African American and Prez's unit commander, but Daniels only stares at Valchek. He checks on McNulty and asks if he's okay. As McNulty sits at his old desk, as you mentioned earlier, Holly and Landsman discuss the shooting.
Oh, not Norris, yeah. It was Holly.
Yeah, that's right, it's Holly, wasn't it? Yeah. And Landsman tells Holly that the victim, Wagner, was a 6-year decorated veteran who was 16th on the current sergeant's list. He then mentions Prez's failures as an officer who has remained in the department only because of Valchek's support. And Landsman claims that it's a clusterfuck of a situation, as a decorated officer was killed due to the incompetence of a more inept officer. Yeah, so sorry about that.
So the aftermath.
I flew through that, but yeah, there's a lot to take in there, really. There's a full sort of 15 minutes of the episode dealing with the aftermath of that.
And we start off with seeing all of the higher-ups going into damage control mode and doing everything they can to make it to not look too bad on them or the department, or without trying to burn anyone's career over the incident, of course.
Yeah, it's quite cool to see everyone come in at night, plain clothes. It's a real emergency situation, and they're trying their best to keep it, sort of play it down. But it's going to be very tricky. So it's quite intelligent the way they discuss the racial element here, and just
because as the audience, we probably haven't really considered that so much. I mean, I guess it depends on who you are that's watching it, but because you know Prez as a character, and you don't kind of assume that there would be any racial component to it. I somewhat felt like it's only when they started talking about it that it actually became a factor for Prez's situation.
Yeah, that's certainly very true, and it's only a keen political mind that would probably conceive it in the first place. But yeah, it is pretty horrifying once you realise the gravity of that, what it kind of symbolises in some ways, and
yeah,
it's just really heartbreaking. Like, it hits harder than many of the deaths so far in some ways, and mainly because we've seen Prez come so far, and it's just so unlucky in this situation. And by the same token, it's really nice to see Daniels is willing to sidestep the lawful procedures to come and give him a bit of a pep talk, a bit of a shoulder to lean on. So really, really good moment for Daniels, as he's the guy who's constantly battling with protocol to get the right thing done, but also to get the politically expedient thing done. And right here, he kind of takes a big sidestep around the law to go and chat with Prez. And it's just tragic to see Prez tell Lester I'm sorry. He's pretty much knows he's gone. And then when Daniels mentions that he's a suicide watcher, definitely. I hadn't considered that either, but yeah, you're absolutely right. And so sad stuff.
Not only is it a really good performance by Jim Frost, who really sells the really quite bewildered despair of Prez's character here. It's also a very delicate point that he raises about the racial element, in that he's in this almost cognitive dissonance that on the one hand he's pretty certain that there was no fear or hatred, or certainly not racial hatred, that motivated his actions, but at the same time, like he says, how can you really know if any of that is in your head? How do you know what is conscious and what is unconscious when you're making a decision that fast in that kind of high pressure environment?
Yeah, definitely.
So it's a very sensitive point that he raises about it.
Yeah, I think without realizing he was raising the best defense he had. Really, it's like, in the heat of the moment, what is there really to process in your mind at that point? Like,
yeah, that would assume that he had thought about it.
Yeah. It just sort of seemed to be his gut reaction. He was obviously still very stunned, and but yeah, quite possibly. And let's mention the Prez fact here, which I was very astounded to find out, that Prez is the only police-based character in the show who fires a weapon, and he does so on multiple occasions in the show.
Oh, really?
Yep. No other character on the force fires a weapon. There's plenty of people that aim weapons at various people, but no one ever fires a shot, apart from Prez himself. And we've already seen him do it on a number of occasions. I think this is probably the last time he does it, but obviously he did it a few times in season 1. He shot a wall. He shot the 2 a.m. field interviews.
Supposedly shot up his patrol car, which we never saw.
Yeah, we never saw that, but there's a history of it as well. So it's a really quite incredible stat when I found that out. And, you know, if you do think about it, it's certainly very true.
Yeah, that's amazing. The one character who should probably be kept as far away from any of the firearms as possible is the person the only one who seems to fire one.
Yeah. And in terms of just his character as well, that the person who's the least fired up as a policeman, you feel he's kind of the most laid back and the most,
certainly not a violent individual, but then at the same time, this is a guy who pistol whipped a 14-year-old and, is sort of proven rather strange moments of the ability to be quite cruel or however unintentionally quite violent, and to actually in this case murder someone.
Yeah. It's just
so it's really strange how it's done that and create this character that seems very peaceful and kind of quiet and geeky and focusing on all this maths and stuff, and in actual fact he has quite a strong history of violence.
Definitely, and it's that weird disconnect that really points to the fact of something that he says later when he says that he's not supposed to be a police. And we see here that it makes sense. He's really good at certain aspects of his job, and he's lucky he was able to start performing on those skills by accident in season 1, really. But when it comes to all other aspects of the job, he has really problematic decision-making skills and possibly panics under pressure too much, hasn't been exposed to enough of that side of policing, and he's perhaps really not quite cut out for the job. It's quite great to see him become a maths teacher, because it really feels like a much more well-suited role for him from what we've seen of all his geeky number tricks that he does.
Yeah. So moving on to the final part of that, we had Holly and Landsman discussing the shooting, and obviously Landsman only really knows the record of Prez, whereas McNulty kind of knows the man as a whole. So we kind of see this perspective, especially after having seen McNulty be quite dismissive towards Prez, as you mentioned before, where he's like whistling at him for the video feed of Stringer, and kind of ignores him earlier on when he's with Freeman. So he's kind of thinking about the man that he knows and the man that is being discussed behind him. Yeah, definitely. He wanders dangerously close to being pretty insensitive from what we know anyway, and from what McNulty knows, I'm sure. But then again, like when we first met him, he was being discussed under the same terms by Pullman and Daniels. Like he's literally defined by that moment in his police record where he is recorded as shooting up his own car, and he doesn't seem to be able to escape this reputation he's got in the department, which is another kind of annoying aspect of kind of a tragic aspect of him. And his very appointment hinges on him being with Valchek's daughter. Yeah, it obviously pisses everyone else off with his 9 lives. Yeah. And to be honest, when we consider all those things, it probably is a great thing that he is leaving the force, because I think a fresh start would do him well, really, with the history that he's managed to develop. That's right, yeah. Might turn into a bit of a PR nightmare. Yeah. The media were to get wind of that. Yeah, absolutely. He's keeping it all locked down. I guess there was one other bit with Daniels and Valchek. Oh yeah, this bit was kind of interesting, really, because you have Valchek kind of turning it into the very thing he claims that he's trying to avoid, basically. He's like, in the sense that he wants to avoid there being any emphasis placed on the racial element, he places the racial element on Daniels by saying, hey, you're black, you'll protect the white guy, right? So it's very strange. Yeah, that's true. But very, very Valchek. You play whatever leverage you have to play. And yeah, it's great to see Daniels just completely, give him the eyes, and he's got loyalties to certain people here. He has some real loyalty to his people, and not to others. And it's great that Valchek is off his list. He is just walking away. Yeah, nice shunning of him there. Yeah.
All right. Any more to say about Prez?
No, I think that's about it.
Okay. All right. So 2 more little bits for the major cases. Sorry, it's a long section. So there's a certain lack of enthusiasm to the first DNRs in the burners, 8 of them the following day after Prez's demise. So Sidner and Greggs man the new DNRs looking for a match to Bodie. Greggs and McNulty later resume surveillance in the Western District, but are distracted by Prez's misfortune. Their one-time colleague, Officer Santangelo, spots them and sympathises with Prez. McNulty asks him about his return to district policing and is intrigued when Santangelo is positive about the post's lack of stress. McNulty finally receives a call back from D'Agostino to arrange a meeting.
So yeah, this is kind of just still following on a little bit from Prez's action, and then McNulty getting a little bit of a addition to his conversation with Freeman earlier about needing more than just a good case and needing something outside of his life, and he sees this other side of it with Santangelo, who's actually pleased to get out of that job. He's actually pleased to get out of as he says, banging his head against the wall in homicide.
Yeah.
And to find himself in a position where he comes to work, he works 8 hours, he goes home again, and he doesn't have to take any of it with him. It doesn't burden him in any way. It's not like with McNulty where he feels the need to really imprint himself personally on every job that he does and to make himself culpable to this really, like, to the extent of a martyr in every case that he takes. And that he needs to be reminded that in itself is not going to be enough, and that he's basically going to destroy himself doing it. So he sees an alternative side from Santangelo here.
Yeah. It was kind of quite funny to watch McNulty's face as he's genuinely upset by how uninterested Santangelo is in the real police work. But as you say, it was a nice follow-on from what McNulty was saying earlier, kind of proving his point. And you know, it's nice though, because McNulty's certainly pleasant enough to him and respects him as an old friend, and I think it's genuinely pleasant for both the characters and us, the audience, to see Santi. He's the sort of character that they bring back only every so often so that you can kind of get nostalgic about the early seasons, or he certainly does that for me. It's kind of sort of just bring back all the memories with Santangelo, because he's not really a major character at all beyond this point. So yeah, it was cool to see that.
Yeah.
And
then he finally gets his call back.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to mention that it is typical of The Wire to piss us off as much as possible in terms of making sure the Prez's moment came just as they got up on the DNRs, so that he could not be there to enjoy them. Like that is his forte. Although it's and obviously the detail are very down about it and aren't really enjoying their new discoveries, despite how great they are. They've actually got up on these burners, which seemed impossible only a few episodes ago.
We actually hear Kima say, "I don't even feel like working."
Yeah. Yeah, and it's nice how they bring Santi in to really explain how it's spreading across the whole force. Like, everyone knows about it, but they're not going to open the lid on it. But it certainly doesn't feel like 5 days have passed. Obviously, we heard that the company got the number of days down to 5 for processing a wiretap affidavit. Maybe there have been 5 days that have passed, but perhaps Prez is, a long-term mourning.
Right, so...
Yeah, so...
I guess the next bit will be going on to the actual dinner with...
That's right.
Stevens.
As segued by that phone call, that successful phone call, we'll go on to our final part of the major cases. So McNulty travels to Washington to have dinner with D'Agostino. They talk about their upbringing and then their jobs. McNulty discusses his passion for his work and then asks about D'Agostino's work. McNulty's political disaffection makes for awkward conversation. McNulty is left alone in Washington. Prez sits similarly isolated in the unit's wire room. So yeah.
So things don't quite turn out how McNulty hopes when he realizes that maybe they don't have all that much in common. And like you say, he makes a bit of a political point which doesn't go down too well, because it's basically showing disdain for this lady that he's supposed to be on a date with.
Yeah.
But he does make an interesting point about not being able to see the big picture. He talks about how they don't really have any idea what's going on. They can only see their perspective on it.
Yeah, it never connects, as he says.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess that is part. He's following on in his feelings from what he's seen with Landsman and Holly, perhaps, as they only see that small part of it. They only see that record. They don't see the larger picture. They don't see the man, Prez. So he raises an interesting point, but it's somewhat inappropriate, perhaps, when you're on a date with someone whose job is to assist the very people that he's insulting.
Yeah, I don't know if it came across as an insult. I mean, it was certainly a very personal point of view he had there. And I quite like his honesty here, really. It feels a bit different, or they're certainly changing things up for McNulty. It's just to see him reveal so much about his past, like more than we've ever found out before, really. It's quite startling. We hear all about the college days at Loyola, where we assume he met Elena and got her pregnant within the first year of college. So yeah, it's just kind of odd to get the biggest insight or the biggest shred of history into our main character more than halfway into the show. And obviously we realise that they did away with any exposition scenes at the start. There's no scene where Elena's all like, "Don't you remember when the time in college you got me pregnant?" There's kind of this the past is there, but the characters aren't going to dwell on it for the benefit of the audience. But we kind of find it out naturally at some point. And if not, we don't find it out at all. So that kind of struck me as a nice fact, or a nice factor of the show that's demonstrated here. And yeah, I mean, you could certainly see it as D'Agostino being offended by what McNulty says. She certainly has no interest in what sounds like, to me, a pretty intriguing and fascinating part of policing. Is it because she knows how that sort of policing doesn't rate these days? She must appreciate the dedication to real policing, even if she's turned off by the lack of ambition it suggests. But yeah, I just feel like McNulty's being really genuine here and really spilling some stuff that explains who he is. And it's not often that McNulty gets to reflect or comment on what motivates him, and it's refreshing to hear it for me. So even if he does find it awkward when he's caught red-handed, not having a clue about politics when he's asked who he voted for.
Well, I guess it's continuing from where he left off about trying to make a bit more of an effort and be more genuine, like you say. If he is going to have dinner with her, it's not so much about what he can get out of it, more about how he can demonstrate who he actually is to her.
Yeah.
And if they are going to make if he is going to try and make some kind of relationship out of it, he's actually going to make an effort and try and be genuine.
Yeah.
And the end result is that nothing really comes of it, and there's a really nice contemplative shot of him there, and that quite grandiose shot of him with the Capitol building behind, and the rain, and he's kind of leaning against the car, looking very pensive.
Yeah.
And then we cut to a far more claustrophobic, far less grandiose shot, with Prez stuck in that room that he knows that he's not going to get a chance to get involved with now that the DNRs are matched up, and they're going to start doing some of that kind of casework that he's so good at. You're going to skip between these two very similar and yet also very different shots emotionally.
Yeah, definitely. It was. I did love that U.S. Capitol scene in Washington. That's got symbolically looming large in the background, and he's not wanted by those big politicians up there. And there's also a roadblock in the foreground on the road towards that Capitol building, which obviously makes the symbolism even heavier. And they double up the scene with Prez quite nicely, as you say, grouping together those who have been shunned. And he's because he's dropped off there, isn't he, by the FBI, I think, or something like that, at the detail office. And we assume that he's gone to take his belongings or grab his belongings, and he actually takes some time to stand around and say goodbye to the detail in his own ways, which is quite moving. Even if he does have a very stoic way of conveying emotions, Perez. He just sort of stands there and keeps things internal. But it was really nice to see that as a kind of double whammy ending.
So is that pretty much it for the major case unit then?
Yeah. I think that's pretty much it. Yep. Okay. Chapter 1 done. So next we have Cutty. Cutty is just a one-parter, thankfully. So Cutty oversees some of the landscapers he works with as they clean out a disused building so that he can convert it into a community boxing gym. The deacon visits on his way to church and is impressed with his progress. He warns Cutty that the next step is to get the permits he needs from City Council. Cutty had not even considered this requirement. Cutty spends Monday trying to get the permits he needs, but faces miles of bureaucratic red tape that he cannot navigate. He returns to the deacon for help, and he puts him in touch with Reverend Reed. Reed explains that you need an influential name as backing to get permits and phones State Delegate Odell Watkins to help him. Watkins meets with Cutty and puts him in touch with Marla Daniels. Watkins is supportive of Cutty's efforts, as the gym will be based in the district where Marla will be running against Unetta Perkins, and because it will endear him to the politically influential Reverend Reed. Yeah.
So Cutty gets to learn the joys of the bureaucracy and how he can get absolutely nothing done in a short space of time unless he mentions someone important.
Yep, it's who you know. Yeah, it's again we see that Sunday theme running through, and then Cutty getting his stuff set up. Yeah, with the permits, an interesting pronunciation, but
a little bit of a montage as well, where he's going to visit all the various states in the city government offices, and we get that kind of mini montage of all the people that he's speaking to as he looks progressively more and more flustered. And they just continue to deliver line after line of sort of certainly somewhat meaningless bureaucratic dialogue about needing this form and going to that house and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's like a pretty humorous scene, to be honest. There's kind of a really long scene where Cutty is visibly intimidated by this grand municipal building, and he really strolls up those steps, taking his time. And then we get a 10-second fast-forwarded dose of bureaucracy and permits and different departments and various red tape, and then he's back on the street, walking down the steps again. It's kind of a real whirlwind of disappointment for him, which I thought was quite well conveyed in the way they did it. So all sorts of town planning, zoning, piping, fire safety, all that good shit. So
yeah,
it's pretty ridiculous.
One wonders if The Wire is perhaps using it as an opportunity to make a point about the joys of regulation.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure it is. So it just kind of feeds into that real theme of people trying to build stuff, new lives, cases. There's always that one more thing that gets in the way, and we see that so many times, particularly with the detail, where they always have that one layer of red tape that they're going to have to find a way around. And thankfully for Cutty, he can, because he's thankfully linked up with some pretty influential people. He's landed on his feet.
Yeah, everything goes very well for Cutty in this episode.
Yeah,
as one of the few characters here that actually makes a string of successes in one episode. And it's nice to see at the very end where he gives that little fist pump at the end as he leaves after his help from Marla. He's like, lets out a little yes.
Yeah, it's good to see that. Like it's the opposite of Prez's strand this time around. It's one of the few success stories, at least speaking in terms of each episode. It's a nice optimistic moment for Cutty as he makes a lot of progress, and we see that as soon as you get some sort of money, you can begin making useful connections. And we see that Cutty's link with the deacon and with Odell and with the Reverend in the district is all a result of his link to Grace originally, who used to be stuck in the ghetto as much as he is. So I think when you consider it like that there really is a nice dose of optimism and hope in this episode as far as Cutty's stories goes. And we see that there is a way out for some people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's nice to see Odell Watkins very plainly explain to Cutty why he wants the boxing gym. There's no kind of personal investment in seeing boxing come to help the kids, and there's no kind of. It's just refreshingly straight talking. It's all about the votes. It's a product of politics, and that's kind of true to who we know and what we know about Odell, who's kind of the honourable politician of the bunch of them that are in the show.
Honourable yet pragmatic.
Yeah, I'd certainly go with that.
And then we get another feature, a little bit of Marla Daniels. Because it's based in the district where she's going to be running against Unetta Perkins, hoping that it will give them a little bit of a push in that regard.
Yeah, that's a real subtle plot line, isn't it, that has been running through a lot of the season. I think we do actually get to meet Unetta later on at one of the council meetings, but We know that I think Odell knows and everyone else knows that she's going to get dethroned next time, and Marla's going to be the new face of is it the 11th district or something like that?
The 4th?
Maybe the
I think.
4th. So, yep, it's pretty cool to see that. And it's quite nice how Cutty's story is getting wrapped up with a lot of other people's, even Marla's here. So, and I thought it was great how he's asked who he knows. Does he know anyone influential? And he's like, well, I used to know, Smith and Wesson. That was kind of my original connection to the street. So, yeah.
So that's Cutty.
Good old Cutty.
Making some successes this
Yeah,
week.
it's nice that we can reflect on something positive. Doesn't happen too often with The Wire. Okay, Western District. So these guys are a major strand of season 3, but they take a bit of a backseat this time round. Only a few happenings. So the Deacon, after stopping off with Cutty, the next stop's at the Western District headquarters to talk to Bunny. They discuss Colvin's creation of drug-tolerant zones in his district. Colvin assures the Deacon that he's retiring and is willing to let others decide whether to sustain his initiative. The Deacon tells Bunny that he's created a truce in the drug war and they have a unique opportunity to reach to the people involved.
This ties into another major theme in this episode about finishing or being finished. So we have here we have Colvin saying that he's waiting for his time to be done, and the Deacon trying to convince him that he should really try and finish what he started in order to make the most of it. Perhaps tying into what Freeman is saying about how you can't just get yourself into this into some job and think that that's suddenly going to make everything better. He kind of knows that when Colvin gets out of that, he is going to be thinking about what's happened to Hamsterdam. It's because of his conscientious attitude and the person that he is that he's decided to do it in the first place, and finds it hard to believe on his behalf that he would just suddenly let that go. So it's very kind of astute of the Deacon to see it that way. So in regards to kind of where these other finality themes come from, we have Prez, who says that he is finished. Now that he's done that, and there's one more, I believe. I'm trying to think what the other example is.
Oh yeah, in terms of the finality.
I guess Bernard and Sapper are certainly finished
Yeah, that's true.
after what they've done.
Yeah, and Omar's vague truce with Barksdale's is certainly finished. So
Yeah, that's definitely no longer in place.
nope. Yeah, so that's certainly a cool theme, and yeah, it ties in. They actually put that scene directly before Freeman and McNulty on the Sunday morning. So yeah, it's nice that they kind of marry those two scenes up. And we see that Colvin's job has already come through, his security job, which we later see him working in early season 4. I think security detail. Actually, it was at a hotel, wasn't it, in season 4? He deals with like a stealing prostitute in one of the hotel rooms. I remember that. But
Yeah.
apparently he's got a job at Johns Hopkins University, so maybe he sort of flits around security jobs.
It's kind of a security contractor, maybe.
Yeah, something like that. And we see that he's already got his 14% drop in crime. Like, that's what he wanted. He wanted that difference to be made. And now we see that all he wants to do is jump ship. There's a real kind of, as you say, like a real sense of he's finished now. He's not optimistic in the sense that he's leaving the force, but not, as the Deacon says, for Amsterdam itself. And it's pretty bad that he wants to leave it to the responsibility of the next officer or the next commander, because, it's just throwing them under the boat, because there's no way that under the current administration this is going to fly. And if it's not discovered before he leaves, then someone else is going to take the blame for it. And yeah, there's a lot of strings attached to Hamsterdam that really complicate the situation. And despite how well intentioned Colvin was, it's not going to end well. I don't think anyone was going to think that. So
It shows no matter how grand one person's idea can be, that doesn't mean that they individually can have a grasp on all of its different implications.
yeah, definitely.
So yeah, it's a nice show of how Colvin is very forward-thinking and is capable of making these decisions and has certain ethics or certain principles that he wants to uphold, but that at the end of the day he's still He is but a man. He is but an individual.
Yeah.
And he's only so capable of seeing all of the consequences of his actions, and that if he decides to leave, it's going to be more than just a case of, well, the next person will deal with it, you know.
Definitely. It doesn't feel like a very Colvin way of thinking, to be honest, but I guess he was just desperate for a sense to himself, or at least being able to prove to himself that he could make a difference after all these years of same old stuff on the force.
Yeah.
And he got that. He got his 14% drop. As far as he's concerned on paper, he got it. And the Deacon comes along and says, well, what you haven't done is you haven't made a difference, but what you have done is started a new humanitarian crisis, and we need to sort it out. So it's cool that the Deacon really is willing to jump in the deep end here and make him see it through.
So yeah, the next section, I guess now.
Yeah, so Carver and Herc, and they discover a body inside Hamsterdam. Carver tries to persuade Herc and the uniforms to move the body to prevent Homicide learning about Colvin's plans. Herc refuses to participate, but Carver persuades the uniforms, Tope and Gillen. Crutchfield later checks Carver's stage scene as he calls for Colvin. Nearby, DEU officers Colicchio and Truck question Herc about Prez. Truck comments that Prez must be scared of African Americans due to the racial element described in the Baltimore Sun story. Herc is distracted and decides to phone the Sun newspaper to report Colvin's actions. Oh man, what a dick.
So we can tell that Carver isn't much of a detective if he thinks that dragging this body out is suddenly going to fool all of the people that suddenly arrive on scene. I mean, although this is before we actually find out, I always remember watching this, I was thinking, surely they'd be able to figure that out. Like,
yeah, as we see with the blood stains that follow the drag. Yeah.
And it's strange, although Carver's actions are somewhat understandable in the sense that he wants to protect what Colvin's doing, it's also actually quite unsettling that he wants to move this like fresh dead body immediately up the road. It's kind of a complete lack of respect for the dead person. Yeah.
Yeah, but we see that one of his most important qualities, or what he believes to be very important, is the loyalty aspect, particularly as he was caught up on it in Season 1, and that's obviously where he probably feels the most guilt, and for him, his loyalty to Colvin meant more than perhaps the integrity of that investigation, that murder investigation, and despite the fact that it was a pretty stupid move, like it was very clear that it had been a doctored crime scene, as we saw later on, and Colvin's, he admits that he's happy that, he was doing it out of loyalty for him, but ultimately he's very pissed off that it didn't really pay off at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wish I could say it was the first time we see someone mess with a crime scene on The Wire, but Season 5 seems to have those sort of occasions every 10 minutes, so
yeah.
Yeah, not quite. But we'll get to that later, I'm sure.
Well, at least those are orchestrated by a detective.
Yeah, that's true.
And someone who's able to understand a little bit better about what detectives are able to base their work on, whereas Carver is quite reckless here, I feel. And for once, Herc kind of genuinely does the right thing and is like, says that he'll have no part in it. He kind of takes, unusually, that moral stance.
Mm. Yeah.
And ends up being the one he turns into the whistleblower.
Yeah. And it's oddly Prez's appearance on the front page that throws him over the edge. I think Colicchio kind of points out, obviously he's right on the front page of the Baltimore Sun, and Colicchio's just like, oh, what a dick, this guy shot a black cop. And I think Truck says, oh, he must be a racist, and then Herc's like, oh, I've had enough of this shit. This is all going on the record to the Baltimore Sun. Yeah, it's kind of not cool to see how that all links up, and how Prez is just perceived in this media frenzy that's going to happen because of it.
Another example, as there will be a couple throughout the show, of Herc gaining hold of a piece of information that he unwittingly uses to kind of unleash hell.
Mm.
It's not the last time he'll do that, that's for sure.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Season 4 and 5, I think we see plenty of examples of him using information that really gets people hurt, or investigations bottled, and the rest of it. So, yeah, it's quite a bold move, really, to go and report it. I mean, fair enough, not cooperating in the movement of the body. But it really is a real step over the line in many ways to go and report it. And I think it really spells the start of that divide between Herc and Carver, who are... We've seen a lot of double acting and comedy duo stuff this season, but that really doesn't continue beyond this, really. They really start diverging in their policing methods.
So yeah, anything else you want to bring up about that bit there?
I guess it kind of felt like when we saw this scene to begin with, that it was the show trying to find new ways to strain Hamsterdam, and trying to make it start to buckle. And obviously having someone actually get shot there feels like a natural next step. And how is Colvin going to deal with this, and how's the Western going to deal with it? And it's interesting to see how it is dealt with. It's dealt with in quite an interesting way, and yeah, it really does feel like Hamsterdam's fate is up for grabs now. And again, just another big platform for Carver to show off how much he's grown as well. And yeah, it's the end now for Hamsterdam. The experiment's kind of over.
Yeah, it's good that it doesn't try and give Hamsterdam a free pass. It doesn't try to take this progressive idea and suddenly show it in a very idealistic manner. It does try to punish it, like you say. Mm. So, and it definitely gets punished here, as it, like you say, it really does signal the end of Hamsterdam.
Particularly with that phone call, like we know that there's no secrecy left now. Like it's just a case of waiting to move in and shut it down.
Yep.
All right, so final Western District moment. So Colvin meets with Carver and learns that Crutchfield has realised that the body has been moved. Colvin realises that Carver acted out of loyalty to him and tells Carver to say that it was Colvin who moved the body fast. Colvin promises Crutchfield he will deliver a suspect if he can leave moving the body out of his case file. Colvin meets with the crew chiefs and threatens them with the closure of the free zones if the murderer does not turn himself in. So we've discussed kind of half of that. There is a really cool element with Colvin really laying down the threat on the mid-level dealers to get them to bring the shooter in. And that's certainly a really good move to appease Crutchfield. Instantly gets himself a confessing suspect.
It's interesting that he doesn't seem all that confident about it working when he's talking to Carver again. Mm. But he does get his result in the end. So
yeah.
So I guess that's what matters for him. And he's able to placate Crutchfield, like you say. He's got the shooter. It shows that the dealers have now become quite reliant on Hamsterdam, whereas before, you know, especially when it started, there's no way they would have taken orders from the police in that way. But now it's a genuine threat that they can use against them.
Yeah, he's looked at more as this mayor of this unique town. And people see him as...
City of Pain, isn't it?
Yeah, there's the City of Pain, as it's dubbed by the Deacon. And obviously people know him as the guy who made it happen, and they're now reaping the benefits of it, and I guess they now have more reason to listen to him and actually, you know, respond to what he wants. Comply with my directives, as he used to put it. But yeah, so it's cool to see that, and he also kind of reveals to them why it's such a mutually beneficial thing. If they hadn't worked it out already, you know, it's... you guys make more money, I have clean corners. Like we're making some real developments here in terms of policing and drug dealing. And it's been
I guess he tries to pull a bit of trying to make them feel a little bit guilty for not upholding their end of the bargain, and in a very collective sense rather than individually making it anyone's fault.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a while since he's had to round up the mid-level guys, so it's nice to see him doing another pep talk. And I mean, skipping ahead to Barksdale a little bit, but it's nice that Stringer's the reason that Hamsterdam stays open. Stringer, you know, he says do it, like get one of these guys to walk in and hand himself into the cops, because Stringer certainly doesn't want to get rid of Hamsterdam. He's as much involved with the reform as Colvin is, the two big reformers.
Another business decision.
Yep. Okay. All right.
Yeah, that's about it for the Western District.
Okay, so one little bit for politics. Fairly short this episode. So Carcetti meets with his colleague, Councilman Gray, and learns that he is planning to run for mayor. Carcetti asks what Gray's campaign will hinge on, and Gray reveals that he hopes to run on education. Gray talks about soliciting help from Watkins, and Carcetti warns that a subtle and patient approach will be needed to split Watkins from the mayor. Gray offers Carcetti a place on his ticket as council president. Carcetti and Gray meet with Watkins to discuss their proposal witness protection scheme. Carcetti convinces Watkins to offer funds in order to persuade Mayor Clarence Royce to start the initiative. Watkins is open in discussing his disillusionment with the mayor.
So a little bit more progression going on with this politics storyline. As we mentioned before, the Carcetti bits sort of get dipped in and out of throughout this season because the real meat is yet to come in season 4. But we see at the beginning of this rivalry between the two of them, especially seeing as, you know, at this stage, Tony Gray doesn't know that Carcetti's making his own run for mayor.
Mm.
And it does seem like when he's talking to him about, you know, how he should play with Watkins, it's almost like Carcetti's using what he's learnt already to try and, I don't know, help him out in a way to see if it would work for himself. So yeah, he kind of gets a little bit of experience on the part of Tony Gray here. He kind of doesn't have to be the fool guy based on what's going on because it's Gray who's sticking his neck out.
Yeah, definitely. And there really is a sense that Tony's playing the short con and Carcetti's really playing the long one, and it is painful to know how much of a betrayal is already running through the head of Carcetti in what is a pretty well-developed and quite natural relationship they have on the show at this point and throughout season 3. But that's the ruthlessness of politics for you. And there's a lot that's not said here. Like Carcetti seems to know that education is a good platform for him, as far as Carcetti goes, because it's not big enough to get the city inspired. Although, unlike crime, which he kind of promotes himself on. Although in hindsight, it's a great cornerstone, as we know the school's deficit that's about to hit. It would be far more justified to allocate the resources to the school's debt if he ran on an education cornerstone. So perhaps it was hard to win the election with, but it would have been better in the long run. And yeah, I just think they're a good duo, and it's quite painful to see that the foundations of this betrayal starting already.
Yeah. And interesting that it points out, like you say, that the value of that education as it gets shown through season 4.
Absolutely.
And that it manages to creep up with that budget deficit. So
definitely, yeah. And what did you make of the Odell discussion?
So obviously he was being a little bit more candid than perhaps they expected him to be. And that he seems to warm a little bit more to Carcetti than to Tony Gray.
Yep.
In the sense that he has a good laugh at Carcetti's comments. So I don't know, maybe just trying to suggest that at the very base level, Carcetti is learning a little bit more from his likability lessons, if you like.
Yeah, definitely.
Coming across as a bit more of a natural leading politician.
Yeah,
whereas Gray may seem a little bit more obviously opportunistic.
Yeah, he's not quite got the long game plan that Carcetti knows he needs, and yeah, it's just good to see them making friends with Odell very, very quickly. Actually, there's not much time spent wasting. They seem to get along very quickly, and it seems to be mainly brought on by how bad Royce is rather than how good Carcetti is. I guess it's more speaking about Royce than it is about Carcetti. But yeah, just another little check-in with Carcetti there and Tony Gray. So let's move on to another fairly meaty bit. We're coming towards the end. So this is the second of the two really big bits. I'm going to try my best to cut this down. So this is the Sunday truce. Omar Little arrives at his grandma's house to take her to church. Barksdale soldiers Gerard and Sapper are staking out the house. But Gerard's weary of breaking the long-standing Sunday truce, so he phones Slim Charles before making a move. He's unable to get a hold of him. Stringer Bell hosts a meeting with the co-op, and Shamrock accompanies him. Fatface Rick, Prop Joe, Quintel Williamson, Phil Boy present a united front in criticising the Barksdale's turf war with Marlowe. They remind Stringer that one of the aims of the co-op is to reduce violence as it brings police attention. Joe is quick to place the blame at Avon Barksdale's feet. During the meeting, Shamrock gets a call from Gerard. Shamrock questions Stringer, who gives the go-ahead. Omar is already leaving the house and has a taxi waiting, and Sapper and Gerard open fire, but Omar manages to bundle his grandmother into the cab and escape. Later, Slim Charles chastises them for breaking the truce, particularly when Omar was with his grandmother, and especially for failing to kill Omar and damaging the Barksdale reputation. Slim berates them further for destroying Omar's grandmother's crown hat, claiming that their mothers raised them poorly, as they would not have pulled an act like that in front of an old lady had they been raised correctly. So there's some real traditional values running through this part of the episode.
Yeah, so for all of the sort of reckless violence and disregard for one another that we've seen thus far on so many times on the street, this is actually one of the traditions and honours that people still seem to carry out, and that is that Sunday morning truce.
Yeah, definitely. And
it was interesting to see a little bit of tradition running through the street there.
yeah, it seems like such an odd rule, but we hear stories a lot about times during the Great Wars of the 20th century where both sides would stop and celebrate on certain holidays, wouldn't they? And stop the fighting. And this is a similar sort of concept. Obviously, it makes sense that Stringer doesn't want anything to do with it, as he's far too pragmatic to have time.
It means nothing
Yeah,
to him.
it's just sentiment, isn't it? There's nothing about this that makes me money. So why would I bother, sort of observing it? And yeah, so it's.
I'm sure Milo would have done the same thing as well.
Yeah, it's just a.
He says so himself later on that he's not one for
Exactly.
sentiment.
And for them, it's a formality that gets in the way of efficiency. You might as well kill him now. Why wait? So it's kind of cool that happens, and it's good to see the co-op discussion as well. We see that Avon is causing some badness, I guess, as Joe puts it, and although Marlowe would have probably done it on his own anyway, without Avon causing all the ruckus. I mean, Marlowe was rising up at the same time, and the police presence is a real concern for them, and other crews have a new element of consideration as they have to try and disassociate with Barksdale crews to avoid being confused for one now that Marlowe's got a sort of vendetta out on them, which is another consideration that I hadn't even thought about, but makes a lot of sense. And, Stringer really silently slamming on his anger as, he's hearing his worst nightmare here unravel in front of him. The co-op, which has been such a cornerstone of his change and reform throughout the show, and he's almost being pushed out of it now. Like, he needs to get his dog under control, I think Joe puts it in some sort of similar words. And
it's interesting too that Stringer, despite all this, doesn't really bear any of the blame for what happens with Omar, even though he's the one that gives the go-ahead. It's Gerard and Sapper that get all of it, even though they followed their instructions. Gerard doesn't want to break the truce, so he tries to do the right thing, tries to get through to the right person to ask them if it's okay.
Yeah.
Gets the go-ahead from Stringer, who he's hardly going to say no to. And they carry out their orders, albeit far too late at the wrong time and in a somewhat inappropriate manner. But they've kind of done what they're supposed to do, and they're the one taking all of the flack for it.
Yeah, a typically stupid move for them, but and just in the way that they actually go about the shooting. But I think Stringer is somewhat immune from the criticism, being a semi-official boss. There's obviously two different Barksdale groups at this point in time. Slim Charles is very much one of the Avon crew, and as much as as Gerard and Sapper's, as you say, it was not their call to do the shooting, but it feels like Stringer kind of is above being criticised for here. They know he's a different animal, and it's quite tricky. And Gerard and Sapper really being caught in the conflict between the two bosses. They are obviously very loyal to Stringer, but perhaps Avon should carry more weight, and they're being caught up for that reason.
Yeah, well, it's because of the whole hit out on Omar that they're troubling themselves with all of these things.
Yeah,
so.
And I mean, perhaps it's slightly ironic that Stringer is calling a hit during a meeting where they're discussing the reduction of violence, but
yeah.
but considering Omar was the one guy who could cause more damage alive than dead, so Stringer obviously has Omar as an exception, and I think the anger that he feels about Avon in the meeting as well probably contributes towards his willingness to call the hit. So there's a number of factors working here.
I think it was interesting as well how... do you remember the very first episode where we see Stringer drawing that cartoon? And I think we mentioned before how we never see Stringer kind of do anything like that ever again. His kind of ability to draw these cartoons is never brought up again. Instead, in this co-op meeting, we see Shamrock doodling on the pad, and sort of Stringer picks it up and looks at it.
Oh, that's very true, yeah.
Whilst they're chatting. It's interesting that he does that.
Yeah.
I think there's some large-breasted woman on it.
Yeah, he's drawing a nice naked lady. Yeah, it's...
As opposed to a large-breasted man. I don't know. But anyway. But yeah, it's interesting that he kind of picks that up and looks at it, and there's that kind of drawing going on there. But this time it's Shamrock doing it, and still to this day, I think it's interesting that they show that he has this kind of drawing skill in the first episode, and it's just never brought up ever again. Yeah, in no way.
Yeah, it's like kind of an element of Stringer that they perhaps hadn't quite nailed down and didn't want to resurface it. Doesn't really feel like Stringer, but I guess it's nice. I hadn't really thought about how that suggests kind of a cyclical element, as we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
The idea that a replacement is brewing for Stringer. And I thought it tied in quite nicely with McNulty turning off the war channel and turning off the politics channel as well. Kind of not being interested in the wider aims of your organisation, but sort of passively being involved with them.
Yeah, only focusing when there's something that you can personally gain out of it.
Exactly. So I think those scenes were pretty much back to back between the credits. So it's pretty a nice little thing to notice. Yeah. So as we established, another great tale of Stringer's business-oriented and pragmatic character, that there's no consideration of the truce, and Slim Charles being the total opposite here, like being a real supporter of the truce. I'm just loving how his beads jingle as he talks as well. There's just something so...
Yeah, this is a great Slim Charles moment, isn't it?
That jingling. And not your mum's for sure. And so I think he refers to Omar's grandma as a bona fide coloured lady. Which is quite an endearing description, really.
Yeah, I'm sure there's more to that description than I think I sort of really have any idea about. No. It seems like it's very serious the way that he puts it. So I'm sure that there's more gravity to that description than we realise. But he certainly expresses it well. So, and it's a very endearing scene for Slim, who comes across as very, very honourable, and despite everything, he does come across as a decent guy here, trying to do the right thing, trying to uphold that truce. Even someone like Omar, who's been commanded by his boss to sort of do everything he can to kill, he's still not willing to overturn that in order to get it done. Yeah,
definitely. And I think that the chats about it afterwards do really demonstrate how Slim is an Avon loyalist now, and Stringer giving the order doesn't even play into it. Like, as far as they're concerned, he is a guy who dances around playing with money, pretending he's part of the gang in suits. Like, I certainly get that impression that from Avon and Slim Charles and the rest of them, that he's kind of off playing business and not really being a serious gangster. Which is, so it's nice to see that. And yeah.
All right, what's next for this section then?
Yep, sure. So Bernard and Squeak hire a car to continue their work. Unbeknownst to them, they are being followed by Sidner, so we saw that from the other perspective in major cases. Bernard delivers the phones to Shamrock at the funeral home. Shamrock asks for the receipts, but is not put out when Bernard claims to have lost some of them on the road. Shamrock notices an agitated Gerard and Sapper waiting in the service room and remarks on their poor judgment in breaking the Sunday truce. Avon comes downstairs to talk to another pair of soldiers, but coldly ignores Gerard and Sapper.
Just a little interim scene here, I suppose. Kind of strange that Shamrock should chastise them for their poor judgment when they passed the phone call through him as to whether or not to do it. So
yeah,
I don't know if that's just kind of like a sort of mocking.
Yeah, I think it's just to fit in with the crowd. He mentions it, but Shamrock's so much one of the he's part of the Stringer crowd. He can't really comment on this stuff because he really is to Stringer as Slim Charles is to Avon. Like they seem to have their clear second in commands. But yeah, I haven't got too much to say about that section, really. It's just kind of getting between things, really.
A little bit more showing how things are getting a bit sloppy with the receipts and whatnot. Yeah,
and Shamrock's not too fussed about it.
I think we mentioned before, back when it happened, that when Stringer made the decision that it turned out to be not a particularly good idea to elect Shamrock as the guy to be looking after all the receipts and everything. He felt like it was something that he didn't think he should be doing anymore because now that he's the big important businessman dealing with people like Clay Davis, why should he have to be dealing with the receipts from all these burners? Why not let Shamrock do that? Well, the answer is because Shamrock isn't anywhere near as diligent as Stringer is, and because it genuinely does cost them.
Exactly.
And it allows the detail to follow them and to catch up on them whilst they're in this moment of stalling.
Yeah, and it's such a subtle element that they'd never really know that it was Bernard's very, unnoticeable negligence that really led to them slipping and almost cracked the whole operation for them. I know that next episode we're going to see Freeman pose as a burner salesman, actually, as a result of what they discover from the wiretaps. So there's all sorts of problems they run into just because of this very small oversight from from Shamrock here.
Yeah, I mean, Bernard could kind of act in any way that he likes, and Shamrock could, at the very least, police that. So, ensure that it's being done properly, but he's not. So,
and ultimately, you got to say it was, Stringer's fault. Like, he's responsible for this operation, and he has not put in the necessary, work to make sure that it runs properly.
Yeah. Too busy focusing on other things.
Yeah. Like old Clay Davis, who we're almost going to move on to. But first, let's go to this scene. So after the meeting, Stringer arrives and Avon explains that the new soldiers are from the east side and are working on retainer. Stringer reports the co-op's dissatisfaction, but Avon is not interested. Stringer tells him that Prop Joe has offered to mediate, but Avon is skeptical of his chances. Avon is more interested in Stringer's role in the breach of the Sunday truce. Stringer tells him that he had no idea that Omar was with his grandmother or on his way to church. Avon is disappointed in Stringer's disregard for the truce and the rumours that have started about the incident. Stringer asks about their cessation of business and suggests they move more people into Colvin's free zones. So this is pretty much just Stringer and Avon chatting about their very different, diverging interests with regard to how they should run the Barksdale organisation.
And their reactions to what's happened as a result. I mean, Stringer, he treats all of the rumours surrounding what's going on as laughable and just doesn't seem to care. He says, I heard all that bullshit. Whereas Avon seems genuinely concerned about it. So,
exactly.
So like you say, it's just showcasing the difference between these two characters, how they react, how they respond, how they think they should go forward.
Exactly.
All of that.
And likewise, Avon's the one who shrugs off any mention of the free zone as being an important financial asset. Yeah. So it's just kind of cool. But equally, they're not too rough with one another here. There's not too much animosity you sense running through. There's some relative calm as the leadership goes, from what we've seen in previous episodes, to be fair. And they're both trying to entertain elements of the other's management model. And, Avon's had to take people off the corners for the foreseeable future because of Marlowe's threat, and therefore is gradually entertaining the idea of the free zones to replace it. And Stringer is at least showing some sort of regard for the Sunday truce. He's not completely dismissing it as bullshit. He's just kind of trying to defend his actions by saying, I didn't know his grandma was there, etc., etc. Not to the best extent, but they're at least trying to accommodate each other's ideas a little bit, which is promising to some extent.
Yeah.
And it's quite nice how Avon's going to go and get Gerard and Sapper to buy the lady a new hat. I'm not sure if he followed through with that, but it's a nice gesture that's kind of fits true with the idea of the Sunday truce, certainly.
It's also a final line that makes the whole scene a little bit more lighthearted. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like after the really intenseness or tensity of the previous episode with our moral midgetry, that this is kind of where they should be, or at least trying to make amends. Okay.
So what's next?
All right. Well, there is another great scene, a slightly more intense one with Avon and Stringer coming up, but we'll quickly go here to Joe meeting with Marlowe's advisor Vincent to organise a meeting to pursue a truce. Vincent is suspicious that Avon might have sent Joe. Joe offers Marlowe a chance to join the co-op and keep all of his territory. Vincent explains that Marlowe believes Avon is weak and wants to take over the west side. Stringer meets with his political connection, Senator Clay Davis. Stringer is angry that he bribed Davis to assist his property development business, but he is still facing bureaucratic obstructions. Davis asks Stringer for more time, and Stringer pressures him for results. Davis urges Stringer to show patience and leave the street mentality behind, but Stringer will not be mollified. So a couple of things.
We have various relationships of power and weakness coming into play here, and starting off with Joe meeting with Vincent. Prop Joe is trying to do the obvious thing and trying to expand their co-op and make things easier for the both of them, especially seeing as he knows exactly what's going on with the turf war. And he's trying to do his part to alleviate that. But Vincent makes it clear that, Marlowe, I mean, he's actually spoken to Stringer about this. He's clearly not going to change his mind anytime soon. Clearly knows exactly what he thinks of Avon. So this is just an establishing scene to make it clear that Marlowe knows exactly what he wants. He's not going to join some co-op. He's going to take what he thinks he deserves, or at least what he thinks he can take. And in that same vein, we move on to Clay Davis, where he sees probably a very similar thing in Stringer, where he's going to take whatever he thinks that he can take, and he's going to keep doing it. And
although,
in a sense, Stringer is kind of smart enough to realise that maybe he is being played a little bit.
And oddly enough, it's actually Clay Davis who's doing that. He's the one who's taking whatever he wants to take. He's just, unlike Marlowe, not actually wearing it on his sleeve. He's keeping that part secret so that he can keep on doing it. But it's interesting how these scenes kind of marry up quite nicely.
It's $250,000, is it, that Stringer mentions?
That's right.
That he's given to him thus far. I mean, that's a huge amount of
And
money.
he's seen 30,000 of them come back to him. So he's beginning
from his light bulb sort of contract or whatever it is.
Ridiculous, and certainly beginning to question Davis, as he should have done a long time ago, really. Like, there's a real kind of interrogation process going on now that it's been such a long time and the money just isn't coming back, the returns are low. And Davis blaming bureaucracy isn't good enough for Stringer. Stringer is the last person in the world to know or care about bureaucracy. And it almost looks like, at the end of this scene here, that Stringer is kind of rejecting Davis. He's going to end his ties with him at this point. I'm not too sure.
It also feels like just things keep going wrong for Stringer over and over and over again. Like he's just constantly being pressed back, and ever since Avon's returned, it's just all going very badly for him.
Definitely.
He doesn't feel anywhere near as significant or powerful as he does before. And like you say, it's interesting how we see that characters like Slim Charles do see Stringer as a bit of a hanger-on.
Yeah, definitely. So, and you could tell that following what they've discussed recently, the worst thing for Stringer would be to see Avon have the satisfaction of proving him right about Clay Davis, that he's not quite smart enough for them out there. And you can just imagine those words kind of ringing through him right now as he's beginning to sort of question quite heavily whether he is completely getting played, and unfortunately he's going to discover later on that it's completely true. Yeah. All right.
So I guess we must be moving on to the final bit for this section where Brianna starts asking some questions.
Yes. Yeah. Here we go. So Avon meets with his sister Brianna at the funeral home. She tells him about the possibility raised by McNulty that her son D'Angelo was murdered rather than killing himself. Avon tries to convince her that McNulty was lying. Stringer, who ordered D'Angelo's death, sits calmly throughout the meeting. Brianna begs Avon for assurance that he knew that he could trust Dee. Avon is outraged at Brianna's implication that he was involved and says he had nothing to do with it. Brianna catches the inference that there was something to be involved with.
Avon kind of lets it slip a little bit here. I mean, we mentioned before how he's doing the smart thing. He's trying to protect his business. He knows that to some extent, despite it all, he understands why Stringer has done it. He obviously still respects him to some extent in that regard. So he's keeping it stum here.
Yeah.
But he does almost let it slip that he had nothing to do with it. So
pretty much all lets it slip. Yeah, it's the scene we discussed earlier with following Dan's email, actually, isn't it? That was about 4 hours ago. But it's kind of cool to see, and you felt like Avon didn't necessarily let it slip by accident. He had to let something go because Brianna had got to the point where she knew that there was a truth behind this that she didn't understand. And rather than hurt her necessarily by coming clean with it, he's going to... I guess the whole time he was hoping that Stringer would chime in and explain his part in what happened. And he finds a nice middle ground by explaining that there's an it, or at least inferring that there's an event that he wasn't involved with, but that there is some sort of, ulterior plot going on.
Yeah, clearly she knows that there's more to it than meets the eye. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so much fuss being made about it.
She's really pressing to the point where there's not really any further denying that can be done. Like something's got to crack. So it's really quite tense just seeing Stringer as he rather sheepishly just sits there and watches as the two siblings try to, milk the truth out of the other. And Stringer kind of just almost incriminates himself by being so quiet and sort of withdrawn from the situation. It's just interesting that I don't know why he doesn't tell her straight up. I assume it's probably to avoid hurting her, really. But as we mentioned, they are practically admitting that something about Dee's death was planned. So, yeah, it's an odd middle ground, and yeah, things are getting really, really tough about it.
He is not willing to protect him entirely, but is able to do just enough.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Final Barksdale bit, very short. One of the Barksdale crew chiefs meets with Stringer and Shamrock to discuss Colvin's ultimatum. He asks if the murderer has any connections and then decides to have him turn himself in. Soon after, the crew chief escorts the boy into the Western District. So we've kind of been over this already. Just Stringer wanting the free zones to stay open. It's him through and through. Money, no hassle. And it's nice that, unbeknownst to Colvin, he is the one that makes the call to keep Hamsterdam open. So behind the scenes, and that kind of perhaps feeds into they have an ultimatum, I think, in the next couple of episodes where they meet to discuss some sort of truce, or I forget exactly what they discuss, but they meet in a really misty graveyard in a couple of episodes' time.
And of course we see that that kid's obviously got to hand himself in. We find out that he shot the guy because he laughed at his shoes.
That was it, yeah.
You do get a bit of a sense from Stringer here that he's a little bit tired of having to deal with all of this puerile stuff on the street.
Yeah.
And obviously he really wished that it would work out with Clay Davis, because that maybe seems a little more serious, a bit more adult as far as he's concerned.
Yeah.
Rather than having to deal with all of this stuff that seems very trivial in comparison.
Definitely, and it's nice that he at least, makes the relevant checks. Has he got any links to anyone that he could spread some shit about in the can? And he's a complete unknown. He's very low level, so yep, why not lock him up? And I'll keep making my money.
Yeah.
So that's the first time he makes a deal with Colvin, although he doesn't actually know he's making a deal with Colvin, which is quite strange. Right. Final section. Omar. One little scene, and let's get it over with. So Omar talks to Dante and Kimmy about his narrow escape. He's outraged that the Barksdales would attack his grandma on a Sunday, and ashamed of his life. His grandmother believes he works in an airport cafe. He tells them that he's going after the Barksdales once again. Kimmy decides to leave if Omar insists on going after the Barksdales, because there's easier money out there. Dante stands by Omar, but he tells him that he's going after them alone.
So this is a really good scene from Omar, actually. Really good venting that he has here. I really feel his frustration and the fact that even someone like Omar doesn't believe that someone would be so cruel as to betray this famous Sunday truce, and that it goes some way to unravelling the story that he's fed his grandmother about who he really is and what he does.
Yeah.
So this is we're talking about the truth being maybe unveiled a slight amount, but not all the way, like we had with Avon only a moment ago. Now we have had an accidental revealing with Omar here, who's clearly had to explain to the police or the hospital, as well as his grandmother, as to why someone would want to be shooting at him on a Sunday.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very true. So he's really riled up now, and nicely pointed back towards the Barksdales for the final showdown. And I imagine we'll be getting a very convenient arrival of Brother Muzone to help Omar out as far as that goes. And
shuns Dante here.
Yeah, it's odd because the Barksdale organisation's unofficial split is quite similar to the Stick Up Crew split that emerges here, with Kimmy admitting that she's the stringer of their organisation. It's about the money and not the heart. So she runs off and does her own thing. and Omar is very much in it for the revenge, for the emotion, and Dante's just kind of in it for Omar, essentially. But Omar is very much believing in his single, this is his work, this is for him to do. I shouldn't put anyone else in danger in the process. I've already lost Brandon, I don't want to lose another one, so...
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Safeguarding what he does have in case he happens to lose it all.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously this doesn't bear well for Omar, not for Omar, for the Barksdales. They have now got all sorts of threats lining up at their door. Not least the fact that their management is on the shitter or whatever you call it. There's also the lurking threat of the Stamfields, who are remaining fairly unseen this episode, almost kind of worryingly so, just to make the organisation seem a little bit more unsettling, I guess, as we sense they're planning their next manoeuvre, perhaps. But I think it was, obviously, couple that up with Omar, we see that things for the Barksdales are really going downhill very quickly.
And that's just it, isn't it? The Avon wanted to fight on two fronts, and those two fronts are fighting back.
Yep.
It's like what Slim Charles says later on about that being the thing with war, that once you're in it, you're in it.
Yeah.
And it's going to take, if you were watching this episode, having not seen any of the other episodes after it, you'd be thinking, it's going to take one hell of a miracle to save the Barksdale organisation from this, because, like you say, they're just facing it on all fronts now.
Definitely, yeah.
This once large, proud, intimidating, influential organisation has become somewhat of a minnow, and it's kind of not because the people in it aren't still powerful. They're all very smart and very driven, and all very based around much of the same things that they had when they first started. It's almost like they've just come to a clash. Too many big egos.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, absolutely. That's the dangers with having a dual kind of leadership, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so we have 5 minutes left to mop up the final sections. And
why exactly 5 minutes?
I don't know. 2.5 hours feels like a very round episode time, but I'm very happy to go on for another half an hour if we have enough to say.
Well, let's see what we got. Let's move on to our final sections.
The job will not save you, Jimmy. It won't make you whole. It won't fill your ass up.
I don't know. A good case.
Ends. They all end. The handcuffs go click and it's over. And the next morning, it's just you in your room with yourself.
Until the next case.
Boy, you need something outside of this here.
Like what? Dollhouse miniatures?
Hey, a life. A life, Jimmy. You know what that is? It's the shit that happens while you're waiting for moments that never come.
All right, so in terms of characters, who did you feel stood out here?
I think it's a really, really good performance from Jim Truefrost in this episode. He really, really brings it here. A very tragic tale for Prez after seeing a very, very likeable character, and we've said already how it's a really strange relationship that we have with this character who seems very placid and geeky and likeable and is a bit of an underdog and is there to do a lot of this work, has come a long way from being someone who's supposedly a hump to arguably one of the most important people in the detail, is contributing so much to all of the bread and butter work that they do when making investigations. And it's all suddenly come crumbling down, and I think it's a really interesting sort of end of a certain part of Prez's tale here as he moves towards becoming a teacher instead. And you just feel how alone he must be when they're in that detail room at the very end of the episode.
Yeah.
Although I'm not sure who's meant to be watching him, like Daniel's asked for. Doesn't seem to be anybody there.
He's dropped off by someone, isn't he? I think we don't know who it is. It's some just random person, but there is someone that's kind of taking him around and escorting him between places. I mean, he's got a wife at home, so maybe they can relay the message and hopefully she'll provide the moral support needed.
Yeah.
But yeah, he does a good job, and he doesn't do any sort of overacting at all, which might be a risk with this sort of high drama scene. In fact, it's very much understated completely. I mean, he's such a stoic kind of character, really, when it comes to any emotions other than I'm a geek with my GPS, etc. So it's
There's no particular need for him to suddenly become hysterical, is there?
No, exactly. I mean, he just stays very bewildered, I think he just zones out for a lot of this episode, really. He stays very disconnected from his actions. And we get that a lot, and it's quite tragic, really, to see him at the end, sort of taking his last breaths in the detail room, where he's just found his love for police work finally.
So yeah, I did find it a little bit easier this week. I'd be quite happy to nominate Prez.
Yeah, and I thought by the same token, Prez's scenes reflected really well on Daniels, and I thought Daniels did a fantastic job this episode. I really enjoyed the scene where those two discussed in the box. And Daniels really showed some real loyalty to his people there. Went out of his way for, by a big long shot to help him out. Good to see Odell as well. The uplifting stories are so few and far between that you get drawn to a guy who's responsible for a good one. And Odell was responsible for 2 here, both Carcetti and Cutty, this episode. So I thought it was quite nice to see him doing what he does best. And
he's putting Marla in a position to gain some leverage over Unetta Perkins as well.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely, it's tricky to like Marla as much when you consider the history with Daniels, who I think we're naturally more drawn to. But yeah, absolutely, it's great that the show provides different scenarios for these characters. Like Marla's a pretty minor character, but she has all sorts of things she goes through in the show. And yeah, so it's cool to see that. And I thought McNulty was another big player in this episode as well. I feel like Prez and McNulty were 2 characters they wanted to build on a lot this time around, and obviously with the stuff going on with Freeman's chat and then his reflection on his own life and what it means to do the job that he does, and that kind of spills out a little bit in the dinner with D'Agostino. And
I was going to say as well that McNulty does well here. Like you say, he has some good moments of realization. It feels like despite everything, he is making a little bit of progress.
Yeah, he's still McNulty, but there's kind of a bit more of a self-awareness than perhaps we felt before, which is always positive.
Yeah, it's encouraging.
Yep.
After all that we've seen.
And I feel like
especially since he's not been doing too well for himself in the last few episodes.
Yeah, definitely. It's that those peaks and troughs of McNulty, isn't it? So, I guess we'd call it a trough, really. It's a pretty depressing end for the guy this episode, but yeah, it's a good performance all round. And I think D'Agostino's probably worth a mention as well. She doesn't get up to too much, but first time that we're kind of unrolling the stone on her as well, seeing a bit more about what she's about. And I don't feel like there's going to be too many opportunities for us to actually nominate her as the character of the episode, so I feel like I might try and squeeze it in now, as she is a fairly prominent figure throughout season 3 and 4.
Yeah, she gets a lot of time in season 4.
Yeah. Okay.
So what about any scenes in particular that stood out for you?
Yep, so I think the 2 D'Agostino bookends were great, really enjoyable, and I quite enjoyed the Carver and Herc friction with the moving of the body. Seeing the first real diversions of their characters, and of course I think the Prez stuff has to be kind of chosen as the highlight of the episode, even if it is tricky to watch. Handled very well, and I think the setup, having some very clever, creepy and not too ridiculous foreshadowings, was quite nice, with the fortune cookie and the black cat meowing in the alleyway and stuff like that. It was really nicely laid on and made for a rewarding rewatch, certainly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I pretty much agree with all that. I also quite liked Omar's frustration in this as well. I mean, he didn't do all that much as a character per se, but it was quite a nice scene, and you really feel that this is the beginning of the end, especially when he says, Barksdale's got to go.
Yeah.
You really kind of you really feel that there, so very important moment. And yeah, I really like the scene where Daniels is trying to console Prez and that room, that whole room in the box. Like it's just
Such an oppressing place to be, isn't it?
yeah, it is, and they're dealing with some very sensitive issues, and these two characters that have a lot of history together. It's seeing a culmination of two people who have worked together for a long time. Daniels has obviously put up a fair bit, but he's seen him come from someone presumably useless and passed on to them purely for administrative reasons, to someone who's of real value, and now it's about to all come crashing down, and Prez realises that not only is it going to be hard for him to come back from it, but that it's probably best if he ceases to be a police officer completely.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. Okay, so the title of this episode is Slapstick, which is a good title on its own. What do you think of it in terms of its relation to the episode?
Yeah, it's a slightly unusual title, I suppose. To be perfectly honest, I didn't really tie it into too much.
Yeah, so I mean, slapstick it's physical humour, isn't it? Really, it's
it's literally just physical comedy,
Yeah.
Which there isn't really any of.
unless
Not a whole lot of comedy in this episode in general.
Exactly, it's very odd. It's probably the most ambiguous of all the titles of the episodes. Like, it's very hard to tie it to anything. I perhaps thought it was perhaps an ironic title and suggestion of Prez's shooting of Wagoner in a very dark sense. That was obviously some sort of physical action. That was one of the few physical actions in the actual episode. And there is another shooting too in Hamsterdam. Beside that, I can't really think of anything too physical that happened. Of course, Omar's...
the moving of the body is about as close as I can think of to something that might be considered slapstick.
That's very
but the scene
true,
doesn't
yeah.
come across in a comical way. It doesn't come across that way.
Because there's a scene in Breaking Bad where Jesse and Walt move the barrel. Remember, they do it under the CCTV camera. That's it.
Yeah.
That's a similar sort of... That's a similar idea, but it's had a lot more slapstick in it. That felt like, a really funny scene. But yeah, I think that's a good point. That's probably the closest we can get in terms of actually a link to the title. So, yeah, an ambiguous one, certainly.
And then our epigraph from Lester Freeman, which is basically just a cut-off of his quote about life, Jimmy. It's the thing that happens while you're waiting, or the shit that happens while you're waiting for moments that never come.
Yeah, really.
And it's just a generally kind of, I suppose, important phrase, one might say,
Yeah, I really quite like the epigraph, actually. I do believe that the fortune cookie probably would have been more impactful, but it certainly summed up the episode quite nicely. And so I think it was Freeman saying this, and then perhaps D'Agostino proving it physically later on, that made these words have a real effect on McNulty, and we know they're going to drive him towards Beatty. That's the kind of the next step, only in a few episodes' time. And I think it also applies quite nicely across the episode, though, waiting for moments that never come. Certainly Stringer and Clay Davis is in that camp. Stringer is waiting for a moment that will never come as far as Clay Davis's payout goes. Brianna is waiting for an answer that will never come about Dee. And also one of the key points of contention this season, Avon is trying to bring a sense of rep and culture to the street, and Stringer and the co-op are trying to monopolise the street, and they're both never going to get what they want. They're going to find some sort of ugly middle ground between the two of them, between now and until Marlowe eventually becomes the new rise of power. So I guess you could kind of tie it into that as well.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. I think Middle Ground is actually the name of one of the episodes coming up, the next couple. And also you got the idea that constantly trying to plan out your life is merely wasting the potential it has to surprise you, I think is what Freeman actually means by that quote. It's a fairly philosophical point, really. And the idea that Jimmy feels all he needs is a good case to fill him up to make him happy, it's not true. Like, if he really thinks about it in the long term, he's going to need a lot more than that. He's going to need real stability. And it's a real lesson that Jimmy learns.
It's also interesting how that might apply to Greg's, who's taken a very similar approach. She's abandoned of what she had from her, the sort of stable domestic home life for the police work, because that's what she cares about, but can't help but feel that it might reach a similar point for her as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, there we go. Anything else to say?
Yeah. Just trying to think about this. If there's anything about the sort of the episode in general, and we already talked about that sort of finishing, coming to an end kind of theme going on.
Yeah.
No, that's about it really. I mean, this is sort of coming towards the closing stages of season 3 now. Things are getting very busy. Lots and lots of problems for the Barksdale organisation, which obviously comes to a head as we move towards the sort of finalising of things for both Stringer and Avon.
Yeah.
3 episodes to go now?
Yes, yeah, that's right.
10, 11, 12?
Yeah, I think so.
So, yeah, it's exciting to be... It's weird to think that we're almost at the end of another season.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, really. It won't be long. And I feel like the two major themes of this episode really were the idea of, I guess, two people being left out in the lurch. You have McNulty and Prez, who seem to have some sort of parallel stories here as they learn life lessons very quickly. And also, perhaps, the idea of the bureaucracy and the red tape hindering others and helping some. Cutty is particularly a good example on the receiving end of that stuff. So I feel like that was perhaps the main messages that the episode was trying to convey.
All right, well, thanks again for joining us. Apologies again for the slight delay, but we should be back as normal next week. It's going to be... I can't remember the name of the next episode. Episode 10. Reformation, is that it? Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll be back next week for season 3, episode 10. By all means, we've had loads of email in the interim, so we're always happy to receive it. Always reply to it as soon as we can. So if you want to send us a message, you can contact us on the website. There's a contact page on caughtonthewire.wordpress.com and an email address. You can email us at caughtonthewire@gmail.com. So until